Order, please. We'll now move on with the daily routine, beginning with presenting and reading of petitions. Presenting reports of committees. The Honourable Member for Sydney Whitney Pier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Standing Committee on Veteran Affairs, I beg leave to table the annual report for 2015.
The report is tabled. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Honourable Manmeet Bhullar, MLA for Calgary Greenway, was tragically killed Monday in a selfless gesture of helping another motorist in need. And whereas I knew Mr. Bhullar to be engaging, passionate, and committed to his work, especially children in care. And whereas Manmeet leaves behind a legacy of dedication to his work and compassion for those he served in the Progressive Conservative Caucus in the Government of Alberta. Therefore, please be it resolved that the members of this House join me in extending our sincere condolences to Manmeet Bhullar's family and friends as they cope during this difficult time. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. We'll move on to introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 3 of the Acts of 1987, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act, and to repeal Chapter 40 of the Acts of 2010, the Offshore Licensing Policy Act.
The Honourable Minister of Energy begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 3 of the Acts of 1987, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Nova Scotia Act, and to repeal Chapter 40 of the Acts of 2010, the Offshore Licensing Policy Act.
Bill number 135, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 3 of the Acts of 1987, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Nova Scotia Act, and to repeal Chapter 40 of the Acts of 2010, the Offshore Licensing Policy Act.
The Honourable Minister ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce the bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes, 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes, 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Bill 136, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Lunenburg.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill, an act respecting the repeal of Presbyterian Church legislation.
The Honourable Member for Lunenburg begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Repeal of the Presbyterian Church Legislation.
Bill number 137, an act respecting the repeal of Presbyterian Church legislation.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. We'll now move on to notices of motion. Statements by members. The Honourable Member for Argyle-Barrington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to congratulate Natalie D'Entremont for being awarded the 2015 High Five Trainer Excellence Award. She received the award on October 15th during the Recreation Nova Scotia Awards held in Digby at the Pines. The High Five Nova Scotia Champion Award recognizes outstanding individuals who support and inspire the implementation of the growth of High Five. High Five ensures leaders, coaches, and instructors have the tools and knowledge to nurture a child's mental health and create positive experiences for the participants. Natalie is the Active Living Coordinator for the Municipality of Argyll and is dedicated into delivering training workshops to frontline staff and volunteers working with both children and youth. Once again, I'd like to congratulate Natalie on her achievements and for making a difference in our children's lives.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for many Nova Scotians, buying a home is the biggest investment they will ever make. Unfortunately, as costs rise faster than wages, fewer Nova Scotians may never get the chance to own their own home. Mr. Speaker, in 2012, the previous government doubled the first-time home buyers rebate to a maximum of $3,000 to help alleviate the financial burden on first-time buyers. Mr. Speaker, should the Liberal government privatize the registries, the cost of buying a home will likely increase. Other provinces that have privatized their registries have seen an increased cost of doing business for surveyors, realtors, and appraisers, as well as for lawyers. These added costs have made it less affordable for those looking to purchase a home, Mr. Speaker. That is one of the many reasons to keep the registries 100% in the public sector, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we could look to the East Gallery, and I'd ask Cheyenne Hardy to stand up with her parents, Rowena and Chris. Cheyenne is a leader in the community of Dartmouth North, and I'd like to read a member statement to honour the work that she's done.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, today's youth are often portrayed in an unfavourable light, and in my constituency of Dartmouth North, youth fight this negativity and the stereotypes which accompany them every day. One youth in particular deserves recognition for her work, her spirit, and her determination. I met Cheyenne Hardy last year through her involvement with her school, John Martin Junior High, and have watched as this young, brilliant woman makes a difference not only in her school community, but in the community of Dartmouth North. Cheyenne has done tremendous work within her school, most recently being appointed president of the Leadership Committee. In this role, Cheyenne initiated the Lunch with Friends program. Her goal was to provide a safe and supportive space for students who feel marginalized within the school community. Over the lunch hour, students mentor students on issues both within and outside of the classroom. Cheyenne ardently is involved in Between the Bridges and has spoken publicly at all events of this government community initiative representing youth. She also co-chaired the Youth Roundtable organized by my office and also took part in We Act and was a participant in We Day. Cheyenne's community involvement has also seen her speak publicly at Pride events, where she eloquently describes the value of diversity in her role and as an ally to the LGBTI students. Last year, Cheyenne was the first Nova Scotia Girl Guide to win the National Girl Greatness Award and is also a flight corporal with the Air Cadets. So I ask my colleagues in the House, please join me in thanking Cheyenne Hardy for her efforts in making Dartmouth North a better community to live, work, and play. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, the recent loss of 2 processing plants in the Annapolis Valley has many impacts on our community. The loss of stable long-term processing plant jobs is one part of a number of very significant losses. Also lost is the access to markets for farm production from the valley. Options for crop rotations are diminished. To reach the Ivany Report goals, we need a healthy, vibrant processing sector, not only in carrots and salad crops, but also in many other agricultural sectors, such as the meat industries. This will require the Department of Agriculture and Industry to work together to create a plan to encourage investment in food processing. Access to capital and markets are key to making this happen. I call on the Minister of Agriculture not to stand idly by while processing plants close, but rather to start to create a plan that will bring to our province the food for our next generation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm following in the former NDP MP Peter Stauffer's footsteps in calling on the new federal government to change the federal policy around the definition of a veteran. Currently, the federal government has two tiers of veterans: those who served in the Korean War and World War II, and those who have served after 1953. When I asked the Harper government to change this definition, they declined to make the change. I'm hoping that the Trudeau government has a change of heart. Once the uniform comes off, the duty and responsibility of the federal government towards everyone that serves doesn't end. Whether it was in Korea, in the Korean War, Bosnia, Iraq, or Afghanistan, a veteran is a veteran regardless of where or when they served. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to recognize Lindsay Hart of Timberley for demonstrating community leadership. This summer, Lindsay sparked the imagination of many of the residents throughout Beachville Lakeside Timberley when she proposed that the community come together to celebrate Canada Day. Others soon joined Lindsay and they formed the BLT 2015 Canada Day Committee. They were Joanne Iwaswick, Renee Archibald, John Bignell, Adida, Makai Zek Gembesh, and Linda Moxham Skinner. Many local businesses also make significant contributions to the special day, including D & Joe's Country Market and Timberley Dental Clinic, who hosted the event on their property. Affordable Fuels and Metro Home Heating provided the outstanding fireworks display and collected donations to the Parker Street Food Bank. Angus Real Estate sponsored the children's activities in the Kids Zone. More than 700 people enjoyed the event, and planning is already in the works for the BLT 2016 Canada Day celebration. I would like the members of this Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in thanking Lindsay and the BLT Canada Day Committee for their hard work and commitment to community. Please join me in wishing them continued success in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, we were all troubled to learn about the destruction of the forest at Long Lake Provincial Park. In Nova Scotia, we have some of the most beautiful parks on earth, and they need to be protected. We have beautiful forests, rivers, beaches, and trails which support wildlife and important ecosystems. Our parks also provide valuable spaces to enjoy nature and promote recreation for our citizens and visitors. It's not good enough to say this was an accident. We ask and want to see the Liberal government get to the bottom of this and take steps to make sure our parks are protected in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, data released last year by the Tyre and Rubber Association of Canada showed about 1 in 2 motorists opt not to put on winter tyres. The last 2 winters in Nova Scotia has been harsh, to say the least, Mr. Speaker. Driving on our roads and highways without winter tyres put at risk our safety and the safety of others. Many residents in Queens Shelburne, myself included, often undertake a significant commute to and from the workplace. In fact, many of my colleagues on both sides of this House travel from their constituencies on a weekly basis to be part of the activities here. Having winter tyres on your car could be a key to arriving home safely. I asked the government to look at ways to help all Nova Scotians to get winter tyres and to be safe as possible on our roads this winter.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize Mickey McNeil, or better known as the Milkman. For the last 3 years, Mr. McNeil has been collecting canned milk for the local food banks in New Waterford and surrounding area. The idea came to Mickey when he was reading the paper and saw the article that the food banks don't usually have milk to give people because of the cost is too high. At this time, I would like to recognize Mickey McNeil for his community spirit and willingness to help those less fortunate. A truly outstanding Cape Bretoner in Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sydney Whitney Pier.
Sydney River Myra Lewisburg, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, pardon me, Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
I can understand you making a mistake, but I'm the one with the beard. I didn't want to go there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Jackie Gillis from Grand Myra, who was recently nominated for a Business and Excellence Award from the Sydney and Area Chamber of Commerce. Jackie won in the Locally Yours category, which recognized quality products produced by a local business. Jackie Gillis owns the Myra Stitch and Post in Marion Bridge, which is Cape Breton's largest full-service quilt shop. It is a great pleasure for me to thank and congratulate Jackie Gillis and all her staff for all she does for the local community and wish her every success as she continues to grow her business. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, last Monday, the water was finally turned on at Alderney Manor. Since the tragic outbreak of Legionnaire's disease at the seniors' residence in my constituency, which resulted in the death of Beverly Roma, the government responded with a slow and uncoordinated effort. Mr. Speaker, seniors were not able to shower in their homes for months. Their only option was to use bottled water or take a cab to the Dartmouth Sportsplex to shower in locker rooms. This was simply unacceptable for many who have mobility issues. I hope that this tragedy and the slow pace of the work that followed has been a lesson to this government. Seniors living in Alderney Manor deserved better.
The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take a moment to speak on a great man, William Rocky Eric Fleming. Rocky, as we all knew him, grew up in Ketch Harbour, was a 28-year veteran of D&D Fire Department. After retiring, he worked at the pleasure of the Lieutenant Governor until 2013. Sadly, after fighting a good fight, he passed away November 2nd, 2015. Rocky will be missed by an entire community, but more importantly, by his amazing wife, Joanne, daughter, Paula, his son, and my good friend, Matt. God bless you all.
The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on November 11th, 10-year-old Dylan Gunn of St. Paul's in Pictou East marched with Legion members. Not a veteran, not a cadet, but a young boy. Appropriately attired for the day and proudly sporting a poppy over his heart, this boy stood quietly, hardly moving during the entire ceremony. I am remembering the people who fought for Canada, he replied when asked why he wanted to march with the veterans. I'm proud that this young man is interested in his country, our history, and the veterans who made us safe. Dylan, you are an inspiration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a coalition of groups, including the Ecology Action Centre, Some of Us, and Greenpeace, protested yesterday outside the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board over the Shell approval to drill in the Shelburne Basin. A petition with over 233,000 signatures was presented. With this level of concern, it is even more important for the Liberal government to take action to fill a 2-year vacancy on the Petroleum Board. Mr. Speaker, there's no need for the Minister of Energy to continually justify his inaction by blaming previous governments for not filling the Petroleum Board chair. It was, in fact, the federal government's responsibility, and he knows that full well, or perhaps the minister could ask his department for another short briefing on the issue. Regardless, the Minister of Energy needs to get off his hands, do his job, and find the right environmental or fisheries expert to be on the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board.
The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. East Hants RCMP Constable Cheryl Pony is the East Hants School Liaison Officer. She works with the student body and the school administration. She has had to deal with numerous disturbing online safety issues, from unsecure practices to sexting. 4 years ago, she devised a talk on online safety that she takes to the classrooms to encourage students to adopt safer online behaviors. She started the program in the middle school and high schools, but because children from all grades now have access to the internet, she is now taking it to elementary schools. Officer Pony knows that it is important for the kids to have this information so that they can make better choices. Officer Pony has found a lot of success with the program. Some parents have told her that after their kids have listened to her talk, they've discussed online safety with them. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to commend and thank Officer Pony for her dedication to the students of Hants East. She is making a difference. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on November the 6th, Brookfield resident Dawn Hazelton was inducted to the Colchester County Sport Hall of Fame. Mr. Hazelton has dedicated much of his time to the game of softball. He has been involved in many capacities throughout his service to the game, including being a player, coach, umpire, course instructor, rule clinician, clinic presenter, and mentor. He has worked all the national level and numerous provincial, junior, and senior men's and women's events. He was the provincial deputy umpire-in-chief of the Fundy Zone, member of the Fundy Umpires Association. The induction was made all the more special as he was presented the tribute by his son, David. Please join me in congratulating Don Hazelton on receiving this well-deserved honour. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like many Nova Scotians, I care deeply about climate change and the serious effects of global warming. And trees are in fact considered part of the ecosystem and natural capital that protects our planet against greenhouse gas emissions, which are occurring very quickly and warming the planet. So, like many, I was shocked and saddened yesterday to hear about a mysterious clear-cut in Long Lake Provincial Park, just outside of Halifax. It's being reported that anywhere from 12 to 20 hectares of protected land was clear-cut, which will undoubtedly have an impact on the ecosystem of that area. So naturalists and environmentalists estimate that it'll take at least 20 years for those trees to grow back, Mr. Speaker. So I hope that the Department of Natural Resources and Environment work collaboratively to get to the bottom of this incident and that those responsible are held accountable for their actions. Thank you.
The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The best teachers teach not for a paycheck, but because they love what they do, because they care about the future of our youth, because they want to see a better tomorrow. Nobody fits this description as well as Selena Davis-Eno, a physical education and core French teacher at Bayview Community School in Mahone Bay. Selena spends countless hours outside of school hours volunteering her time with numerous school teams and clubs, including soccer, basketball, cross-country, and track and field, carrying out training even during the summer months. Her dedication was recently rewarded as a recipient of the 2015 Lieutenant Governor's Teaching Award. Mr. Speaker, it is with great pleasure that I ask you to join me in congratulating Selena for an award very well deserved. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, with the unanimous consent of the House, could you revert back to government notices of motion?
Is it agreed? It is agreed. We'll now revert back to government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And if I could make an introduction first.
Permission granted.
Mr. Speaker, in the gallery today we have Star Dobson, CEO of the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia, and Nick Peters, Chair of the Board of Trustees of the Mental Health Foundation as well. And if they could stand and get the warm welcome. They were getting that warm applause before I even asked, Mr. Speaker. So if I could now read a resolution. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 24th Annual Compass Group Canada Festival of Trees drew more than 1,300 guests to the World Trade and Convention Centre this weekend for a luncheon and a black tie gala. And whereas proceeds from this very successful event support mental health initiatives in communities across Nova Scotia, and whereas the Foundation ended the weekend by announcing Camp Believe, a new camp for children whose parents live with mental illness. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House of Assembly congratulate Nova Scotia Mental Health Foundation CEO Star Dobson and Foundation Board Chair Nick Peters for a successful Festival of Trees and for the work they do every day to support mental health initiatives across the province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye? Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Speaker, thank you. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Truro Police Service, the RCMP Northeast Nova Traffic Services, Mothers Against Drug Driving, MAD, and all other partners in law enforcement and government are participating once again in Operation Christmas. And whereas we know that impaired driving is one of the leading causes of preventable death and serious injury on Nova Scotia's roads, and that Operation Christmas is an annual campaign that works to reduce impaired driving and encourage more motorists to practice safe winter driving. And whereas checkpoints targeting impaired drivers will be set up in Bible Hill and Truro area beginning today, and more checkpoints will be in place throughout the province during this holiday season. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me in congratulating all those who are participating in this important campaign over the next month, and thank them for their commitment to promoting road safety during the holidays. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. We'll now revert back to the order of business statements by members. The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Sydney Mines resident Jennifer McNeil and her 13-year-old quarter horse, Harley. They just won a champion senior division and overall high point horse for the Cape Breton district. Harley was voted the Horse of the Year by the Cape Breton Western Riders Association. The duo also achieved Provincial Champion Horse and Provincial Champion Senior Rider for 2015 at the Nova Scotia Equestrian Federation Annual Awards. It's a true honour to have this opportunity to recognize this great pair of competitors. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a dominant theme of this session has been the unwillingness of the government to answer questions from opposition members. It's becoming clear to Nova Scotians that beyond blaming past governments, the Liberal government has no answers for the complex issues facing the province. Mr. Speaker, the thing about questions, though, is they linger. While the government can ignore or deflect questions, here on the floor of the legislature, these questions do not go away. For example, yesterday, the Premier was grilled by a group of grade 6 students in Halifax Needham on everything from the destruction of the film industry to teachers' contracts and school closures. Mr. Speaker, many Nova Scotians are now questioning who they voted for, as this Liberal government are not who they said they would be. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this year the Ingonish Development Society and Ingonish Activities Committee were pleased to host the second annual Huckle Buckle Fall Festival from October the 23rd to the 25th. The festival, which commenced last year, was a huge success. It was designed to increase community spirit as well as extend to the tourist season and the Ingonish area. Many businesses and nonprofit organizations like Parks Canada, the Ingonish Volunteer Fire Department fundraiser, Ski Cape Smoky, and Legion Branch 105 helped out by hosting a series of fun fall events during the festival weekend. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to congratulate the community and all the volunteers who made this year's festival a much success. Thank you.
The honourable member for Sydney River, Myra Lewisburg.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Derek and Lisa Kennedy of Little Lorraine on receiving the Judy Spink Award for Family of the Year 2014-15. They received this well-deserved recognition at the recent Muscular Dystrophy Walk held in Sydney. Derek and Lisa have 2 sons, Cody and Dylan, and the whole family have been very active for Muscular Dystrophy Canada for the past 6 years. As I know this family personally, it gives me great pleasure to congratulate them on receiving this award and thank them for all they do for this very worthwhile cause. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Queens, Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the demand for timber in Nova Scotia was but increased the pressures on increased pressures on buyers and sellers alike. Last year, the Department of Natural Resources issued tenders to contractors to harvest hardwood trees to sell as firewood. In Kings, Queens, and Shelburne County, there were no bids received by the department, as there were substantial upfront costs to contractors, which made the tender financially unattractable. I understand that creative solutions must be explored if we are to solve this problem. Last year's tendering process may have been a start, but it was without shortcomings. I encourage the acting minister to look at ways to improve the tendering process from last year to make it more attractive to harvesters so that Nova Scotians have access to the supply of firewood. Thank you.
The honourable member for Kings South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to announce in the House of Assembly that Ms. Shelley Fleckenstein has been named one of the top 50 CEOs by Atlantic Business Magazine for a third year in a row. She has also been named one of the top 100 women entrepreneurs in Canada by Profit Magazine for a sixth year in a row. Ms. Fleckenstein is the founder of King's Physiotherapy Clinic in New Minas, which is a thriving and respected practice. As a business owner and as a health professional with over 27 years of experience, Ms. Fleckenstein also contributes through fundraising and volunteering throughout our community. On behalf of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly, I would like to recognize and thank Ms. Shelley Fleckenstein for her many years of business and community leadership in Kings County and Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to tell members about the Annapolis Valley Gospel Group Sunlight. Sunlight was nominated for 5 2015 Maritime Gospel Music Association Awards, including Best Male Vocalist, Best Female Vocalist, and Best Songwriter. Sunlight's members include Gina Potvin, Roxine Roberts, Sonny Fredericks, and Chris Palmer. On October 17, 2015, at a prestigious ceremony in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Chris Palmer was presented with the Best Songwriter Award. The group's appearances regularly benefit local charities, and each member shares both a deep faith and a commitment to help those in need. It is an honour to congratulate Sunlight for its success in raising over $20,000 for local food banks and for Mr. Palmer's receipt of this award. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, over the past week, countless teachers have been speaking out, voicing their concerns about this government's approach to collective bargaining. Since this government took office in 2013, they've been openly hostile to public sector workers. Now it seems that that hostility has moved to the bargaining table. Like many citizens, I watched the relentless passing of Bills 30, 37, 1, and 100 in the legislature. I am glad the people of Dartmouth South chose to support the NDP, a party that respects workers in this province. The NDP knows that the perceived threat of legislation is hanging over teachers' heads. But teachers need to know that we hear their concerns, and we will continue to fight to protect their rights.
The honourable member for Sackville Beaverbank.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this time to recognize Adsum House. For 32 years, Adsum House has been meeting the needs of women and children, youth and trans persons where they are without judgment, offering a range of services and support during periods of homelessness. Operating out of 4 locations in the Halifax Regional Municipality, there is an emergency shelter, second stage housing, and 2 affordable supportive housing buildings for women and children. Recently, they purchased condominiums in an established neighborhood that are rented as stable housing for women-led families. The word ADSUM means I am here. You can visit their website at adsumforwomen.org to learn how you can lend a helping hand. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Argyle-Barrington.
Monsieur le Président, 2 enseignants de la région de Parent-Bas et employés du Conseil scolaire acadien provincial ont décidé de prendre leur retraite à la fin de l'année scolaire 2014-2015. Denise D'Entremont a enseigné pendant 27 ans dans les écoles de la municipalité d'Argyle. Depuis 2001, elle a enseigné exclusivement à l'école secondaire de Parent-Bas dans une variété de niveaux et sujets. Edith D'Entremont a enseigné à partir de 1982 et a enseigné dans diverses écoles un enseignement de divers sujets. Depuis 1991, elle a enseigné à l'école publique ouest au niveau de 2e, 3e et 4e année. Félicitations et merci à Mme Denise et Mme Edith pour leurs années de service et dévouement et à tous les étudiants qui ont bénéficié de leurs enseignements. Nous vous souhaitons une bonne retraite.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As NDP critic for education and early childhood development, I've been receiving numerous letters, emails, and phone calls from teachers right across the province, all telling me that they feel disrespected by this government. They're saying that 2 + 2 just doesn't seem to add up to 4, since the government boasts of being the most open and transparent in the history of the province, and yet teachers are experiencing something altogether different. Collective bargaining and union contracts are agreements that should be negotiated at the bargaining table by the union and the employer, free from the heavy hand of government. The Nova Scotia New Democratic Party respects the rights of teachers, and they have been fought for very hard and won for years.
Order, please. The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In fact, these rights have been hard fought for and won, and in fact, my own mother marched on the legislature during the Savage years in what was then a very turbulent time for teachers. So I want to say that we hear their frustration and that we are here to be their voices in the legislature. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On October 15, 2015, Louise Henman Poirier was celebrated as Tallahassee's 2015 Wall of Recognition inductee. Louise has spent many years of her life giving time to various organizations and committees. Louise was heavily involved with the Bridgeway Academy as a volunteer member of the Board of Directors. During this time, Louise also volunteered with the Learning Disability Association of Nova Scotia, where she ran summer transition workshops, social skills workshops, and parent workshops. Louise is also a member of the Association of Teachers of Exceptional Children. Louise also is involved in many groups and committees throughout Eastern Passage and Cow Bay. She has been an active member on the Summer Carnival Committee for over 20 years. The Seaside Harvest Festival and the Cow Bay Hall are also fortunate enough to have her on their teams. Louise is an important asset for all the organizations and committees she is involved in. Her energy and positive attitude is infectious. Louise Henman Poirier, thank you for all your years of service and congratulations on your place on the Wall of Recognition. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Summer Street Industries Society is located in Glasgow and is an organization that creates opportunities and a better focus on life for adults with intellectual disabilities. Summer Street is a person-centered organization. People have the opportunity to volunteer or work in the community, to learn life skills, explore personal interests, work in social enterprises, or on employment programs. Programs at Summer Street provide education, independence, employment, and pride of accomplishment. Clients benefit from vocational, personal development, wellness, literacy, and work programs. We thank our community for supporting this wonderful organization. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a perfect world, every Nova Scotian with oil tanks would feel assured that their tank is fit for use. Unfortunately, this government has put up roadblocks and made those who use that form of heating more expensive. The Liberals' 2014 decision to cancel a $1.5 million expansion of the Environmental Home Assessment Program was bad news for Nova Scotia homeowners in need of oil tank replacement. As winter is approaching, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are feeling left out in the cold. This was a cut that hit rural Nova Scotia the hardest and disproportionately affects seniors. This is another example of this current government putting austerity priorities ahead of those Nova Scotians struggling to pay their bills.
The honourable member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Mr. Speaker, it was my pleasure to join a large group of residents on a tour of the New Scotia Windfield facility in North Beaverbank recently. The facility was built under the Nova Scotia government community feed-in tariff program that encouraged smaller wind projects that are in Nova Scotia. The tour of the 4-turbine facility was very informative and provided guests the opportunity to go inside the wind turbines. This facility generates enough electricity to power approximately 2,700 homes. It feeds directly into the Beaverbank distribution lines to power local business and homes, ensuring that all the energy generated by the turbines will be consumed locally. I would like to extend my congratulations and the success of this project. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this spring I had the honour of presenting certificates to the first graduating class from Valley View Villa in Riverton. 20 seniors in their ages 70s, 80s, and 90s who had never had the opportunity to graduate high school proved it's never too late. With caps and gowns, the graduates were piped in, led by local piper Tyler Cameron. The excitement and sense of accomplishment was certainly equal to that of any regular high school graduation. For everyone who participated, I congratulate you and applaud your achievement. And Mr. Speaker, you can rest assured it was a drug and alcohol-free grad party that night. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Clare Digby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the opening of the Digby and Area Health Service Centre last July, I want to recognize the 9-year effort it took to take the idea of having a modern primary health clinic in Digby to its opening last July. As in many rural communities, attracting and retaining doctors in the Digby area is an issue, and this clinic was presented as a possible solution. When first discussed, Digby residents quickly realized the importance of such a project and were very supportive. The Digby Area Health Services Charitable Foundation was able to contribute an impressive $1.7 million towards the project. Money donated to the foundation or raised in the community was used. This is in addition to the $1.2 million contributed by the Province of Nova Scotia, Town of Digby, and Municipality of Digby. Now that doctors and nurse practitioners are seeing patients in our brand new facility, we can pause and be proud of this accomplishment. From now on, it will be a plus for our community when doctors consider their options of places to set up a practice. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Colchester Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ready, Set, Grow Tim Hortons is an annual conference for owners of Tim Horton chains. Along with networking, training, camaraderie, the conference has an awards reception to recognize those owners who go above and beyond. This year, Betty Roop and Roop's Tim Hortons in Brookfield was awarded a 20-year citation for their business and contributions to the area. Betty's son and daughter-in-law, Jack and Leah, represented her at the awards reception on Tuesday, November the 3rd in Orlando, Florida. I would like to acknowledge the history and contributions Roop Service Station and Tim Hortons have given to their community and to congratulate them on receipt of this award. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Armdale.
Speaker, I rise today to inform members about a street naming dedication event in Armdale that honoured an important individual. In the spring of 2015, the Cowie Hill Connector was renamed Peter Saunier Drive. Mr. Saunier passed away in 2008. He was a cherished volunteer, historian, and parade mascot, appearing as Santa for almost 30 years in the Spryfield Santa Claus Parade. On September 20th, family, friends, councillors, members of the Mainland South Heritage Society, and myself gathered at the sign unveiling and cutting of the ribbon ceremony, followed by a reception at the Captain William Spry Library. On behalf of the House of Assembly, I wish to extend our gratitude to members of the Society and Councillor Mosher for the research and time spent to create a lasting legacy for a deserving local community volunteer, and to Mr. Saunier's family and friends for making the event very special. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to thank two Florence sisters, Eileen Romeo and Evelyn McDougall, who have remained committed to honouring the memory of those lost in the mines. The two lost their father, George Carey, in 1947. Each year on Davis Day, the community of Florence gathers at the monument in St. Stephen's Church graveyard to honour the lives of those who lost in the mines. Eileen and Evelyn have organised the Davis Day event since 1999. It's a true honour to have this opportunity to thank those women for all their dedication and organisation of this Davis Day ceremony. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to rise today to congratulate the efforts of Terry Stevens and the team at Sobeys Cole Harbour on their fundraising efforts for the 2015 Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation CIBC Run for the Cure. The run, as my colleagues know, was held this year on Sunday, October the 4th. Terry is a hard-working resident of my riding. With the help of the enthusiastic team of supporters, Terry raised $1,100 for the Run for the Cure. Terry also promoted the food bank drive at the Cole Harbour Sobeys, where she works. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to express my thanks to Terry for all her efforts and for what she inspires in the community. Thank you.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Nova Scotia will see boxing action this Saturday night at the Dartmouth Sportsplex. The Sweet Science has a lengthy history in this province, Mr. Speaker. West Bay Road's hard-punching George Rockabye Ross. Stellarton's Art Hafey, dubbed the Toy Tiger because of the size of his heart. Canadian champ Buddy Day, who was once a Sergeant-at-Arms right here in this legislature. Sam Langford, born in Weymouth Falls, rated number 2 on the Ring magazine's greatest punchers of all time. Certainly one of the greatest fighters of all time, who was never given a title shot because he was so feared. On Saturday, Jesse McMillan of Port Hood will be fighting for the Atlantic Super Featherweight Championship. He will be using his height and reach to his advantage. And, Mr. Speaker, he will show heart, he will punch hard, and he will be feared. May we in this legislature wish this Nova Scotian well. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, may he knock his opponent straight into next week.
The honourable member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to take a moment to recognize 2 Nova Scotians who were honoured in Toronto on Tuesday as part of Ernst & Young's annual Entrepreneur of the Year Awards. Michael Donovan of DHX Media and Alex McLean of East Coast Lifestyle. Across Canada, there were 183 finalists and 51 award winners. Alex McLean, who started East Coast Lifestyle as a business project while studying at Acadia, has seen his company excel, selling over 500,000 units in 55 countries, and to the likes of recognizable persons such as Sidney Crosby and Ed Sheeran. Alex was given a special citation for marketing excellence for the Atlantic region. Michael Donovan, Academy Award-winning producer and founder of Salter Street Films and DHX Media, was the recipient of EY's Entrepreneur of the Year Award, a stunning achievement and one that qualifies him for EY's World Entrepreneur of the Year Award amongst the winners from 50 other countries, to be given out in Monte Carlo in June of 2016. Again, Mr. Speaker, I wish to congratulate these 2 outstanding entrepreneurs and Nova Scotians on their accomplishments and wish them continued success for many years to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Fairview Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on July 27th, Enterprise Rent-A-Car continued their overwhelming support of the Fairview Family Resource Centre by making an extremely generous donation of $3,000 to Executive Director Natalie Brown and her team. Also on hand to accept the donation were a number of children from the community who will directly benefit from these funds, which will be used in support of resources and programming in the centre. I'd like to extend a very warm thank you to Enterprise, in particular Paul Yvonne and Scott LeBlanc, for their dedication and respect they have for the community of Fairview and the hard work done on behalf of the community by Natalie Brown and her team. Thanks.
Just before the time expires for member statements, I'll take the opportunity to provide my semi-annual friendly reminder about congratulating directly the great work going on in our constituencies. So member statements, like all discourse in the chamber, is intended to be directed through the chair and not directly at the contents or the subject of your member statement. So if you can avoid using language and terminology that directs your congratulatory note directly to the subject of the note, in other words, use the third party, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. The honourable member for Bedford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to congratulate Bedford's Sarah Earle on her success in May's Blue Nose Marathon. Sarah ran away with the first place medal in the women's half marathon. As we all know, the annual Blue Nose Marathon attracts thousands of competitors. The half marathon drew 1,700 runners. Sarah ran it in 1 hour, 29 minutes and 23 seconds. If I were allowed to, I would also want to congratulate Sarah on her success in the prestigious Boston Marathon, where she was the second fastest Nova Scotia woman with a time of just over 3 hours and 13 minutes. I'm delighted for and rather envious of Sarah's athletic prowess, and I know all members of this House would want to wish her many more years of running a bit ahead of the crowd. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Preston Dartmouth.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to recognize and congratulate RCMP Sergeant Craig Smith on his most recent achievement as first Black RCMP member to receive the honour of appointment of Order of Merit of the Police Forces. Sergeant Smith is also a chronicler of the African Nova Scotian and the Canadian experience, as recorded in 4 books he authored on the subject. He also lectured in many schools as well as conferences in the U.S. and included National Alliance of Black School Educators in Detroit. Sergeant Smith has received other awards and recognized for his advocacy work in the African Nova Scotia community. He is a Canadian National Get It Award winner and a Reverend William D. P. Oliver Black Wall of Fame inductee indeed. I applaud and congratulate Sergeant Smith on his many accomplishments and advocacy on behalf of the African Nova Scotian community.
The honourable member for Antigonish.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I would like to congratulate Mr. Hugh Stewart of Antigonish on his retirement. Mr. Stewart has been General Manager of Pearl Brook Inc. Disaster Cleanup for 44 years, and in July 2015, he passed his business over to his daughter, Candace McQuarrie. Like so many dedicated workers, Hugh may have officially retired as the General Manager, but I'm certain he will still find ways to be involved with the business. Hugh is also a municipal councillor representing St. Joseph's with the municipality of the county of Antigonish. While I know he may officially be retired, I do not doubt that he will, by any means, slow down. Mr. Speaker, I ask that my colleagues join me in wishing Hugh a very happy retirement and pass along our thanks for his many years as an entrepreneur, as we also wish the best of luck to his daughter as she takes over this important business. Thank you.
The honourable member for Halifax, Armdale.
Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to have participated in September's Take Your MLA to Work Day, organized by the Pharmacy Association of Nova Scotia. MLAs and pharmacists joined ranks in pharmacies across the province. The Mumford Sobeys Pharmacy hosted me for a chance to learn in action how the pharmacy works and to see the many services pharmacists provide. The work they do is amazing. The Sobeys Pharmacy on Mumford Road provides a number of wellness resources, such as healthy cooking classes, mom and baby droppings, one-on-one nutrition sessions, a 5-week healthy weight program, and a workshop on controlling cholesterol. I was amazed by the pharmacy's travel wellness clinic, which operates out of the same location and provides consultations, immunizations, and medications. It was a fun, educational visit, giving me a new appreciation for the diverse services pharmacists provide. I want to thank the pharmacy team for this opportunity and for the resource material given to me to place in the constituency office. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to recognize Valda Kemp of Terrence Bay for her time and commitment over the past 7 years as chair of the SS Atlantic Heritage Park. The luxury steamship SS Atlantic ran aground on Mars Head, Lower Prospect, Nova Scotia on April 1, 1873, the worst marine single-vessel disaster to occur off the Canadian coast prior to the sinking of the Titanic. There were 952 souls on board and 390 were saved. The SS Atlantic Heritage Park was developed by a group of volunteers whose mission it was, first, to restore the 2 burial sites and monuments, and second, to preserve the history of this disaster. The results of their efforts include an interpretation centre, which is home to the museum and craft shop, and a park with a beautiful boardwalk. Valda was instrumental in establishing this craft shop. One of the highlights of the craft shop is the Nova Scotia tartan products. Terrence Bay is the home of the Nova Scotia tartan. It was originally designed by local resident Bessie Murray in 1953 and produced by the Star of the Sea Weaving Studio in Terrence Bay. I would like the members of this Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in thanking Valda for her community service and wish her and the SS Atlantic Society all the best in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Time allotted for members' statements has expired. We'll now move on to orders of the day with oral questions put by members to ministers. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Despite promising to honour the shipyard contract in full, it now appears that the new Liberal government in Ottawa is considering scaling it back. Mr. Speaker, federal briefing notes under consideration by the new Liberal government there spell out options as part of the national shipbuilding strategy, including cancellation of some of the projects. The largest project in that strategy is the $26 billion frigate program to be built here in Halifax. I know the Premier has raised this with the new Minister of Defence, but I would like to ask him if he's also raised this concern with the Prime Minister when he saw him earlier this week.
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. As he knows, leading into the campaign, the Prime Minister was here, made an announcement that they're fully committed to the shipbuilding contract here in Halifax. I fully expect them to honour that commitment. When I had an opportunity to speak with the Defence Minister, who actually toured the shipyard, spoke very highly of the men and women who are working there and the work that's ongoing. We fully expect them to continue to honour that. I think it was obvious that the former Conservative government did not budget the appropriate amount of money associated to fulfil that contract, and the current Prime Minister has committed to honouring that commitment.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Irving Shipyard here in Halifax confirms that they are on time and on budget with the projects that they are responsible for. We have a new Prime Minister now. We have a Premier here in this House. And the fact of the matter is that Prime Minister Trudeau came to Halifax during the election campaign and promised every ship would be built, all 15 frigates and all of the Arctic Patrol vessels. So, yes, we all have the same concern now that this is under review. I'd like to ask the Premier, has he sought a guarantee from the Prime Minister or the Minister of Defence that they will honour the commitment that Ottawa made to Halifax and the shipyard in full?
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Member again for the question. The Prime Minister was here prior to the election campaign, made a commitment to the people of Canada that those ships would be built. I spoke with the Minister of Defence when he was here to the Security Forum. We again talked about the great work that was happening on the commitment of the shipyard. I read the article today in the news. I've reached out to the Department of National Defence today. I'm waiting to get a return call from the Minister of National Defence, but it's my expectation, I think the expectations of all Nova Scotians, that they will fulfill the contract at the shipyard, Mr. Speaker, and they'll fund it appropriately.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier is correct. The Prime Minister, when he was running, did come to Halifax, and he committed to all of the frigates and all of the patrol ships that are going to be built at the Halifax shipyard. But now the election is over. Their briefing notes from Ottawa say that some of these projects are under review, including the possibility of cancellation. So I'm going to ask the Premier, will he seek a guarantee from the federal government that they will honour that promise that they made to the people of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. Again, as I said to the House, I reached out to the Minister of National Defence. I think what the briefing note that the Honourable Member is reflecting is the fact that they were referring to the incompetence of the former federal government when it came to budgeting, Mr. Speaker, and the fact there wasn't enough money to fulfill that contract. I fully expect, quite honestly, the Prime Minister to keep the commitment he made to the people of the province of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Acting Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians have been disappointed by what has happened at the highest levels in the Liberal government in recent weeks. They're upset that a Liberal cabinet minister invoked privilege to avoid testifying in court, and they're concerned that the Premier's Chief of Staff urged the member from Dartmouth East to have a criminal matter dropped, and also offered his wife a job to help bridge the gap following his removal from Cabinet. So my question for the Premier is, why did he continue to express confidence in Kirby McVicker and in his former Environment Minister after these unfortunate incidents became public?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question, and she is absolutely wrong when it comes to anything that is before the courts, Mr. Speaker. At no time, at any time did I ever suggest, reflect that anyone should be involved except allowing justice to be carried out in this province, Mr. Speaker. The member from Dartmouth East made a decision not to go to court for some obscure law, which I said to this House many times I did not even know existed. It was a decision that he made on his own, and that evening, Mr. Speaker, when I discovered that he misled me on what was told to him by the clerk of this House, I removed him from our caucus, Mr. Speaker, and from our Executive Council, exactly what Nova Scotians would expect me to do, Mr. Speaker. And when it comes to my Chief of Staff, Mr. Speaker, he's an honourable, outstanding man, Mr. Speaker, who made a mistake and accepted the responsibility of that mistake.
The Honourable Acting Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I've said in this House and in the media, I take the Premier at his word when he says he didn't know that the minister from Dartmouth East would refuse to appear in court, and that he didn't know what was said by his former Chief of Staff in that audio recording. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, in recent weeks, there's been a very public pattern of inappropriate conduct by top officials in the Liberal government. And this has called into question the tone, the bar that has been set by the Premier for his office and across government. So my question for the Premier is this: what steps has he taken to ensure that the inappropriate behaviour by his top officials comes to an end?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, again, I disagree with the premise of our question, Mr. Speaker. I expect, Mr. Speaker, not only the members who work in my office, people who work across all government offices on behalf of the people of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, to do with the highest level of integrity, Mr. Speaker, and do it in the best interest of all Nova Scotians. And it's been brought to my attention, Mr. Speaker, when that has not happened, I've acted.
The Honourable Acting Leader of the New Democratic Party, our final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I know the Premier wants to move on from the events of the past 3 weeks, and we'd all like to move on, but there are questions that still remain unanswered, and the Premier still has not taken responsibility for the actions of the people he picked to serve in his cabinet and to run his office. So my question for the Premier is this: why has he not tried to bring some closure to the entire affair and display some accountability by apologizing to Nova Scotians for what has transpired in recent weeks under his watch?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. I believe I've acted on behalf of the people of this province in the way the people of this province would want me to act, Mr. Speaker, when information is brought to my attention that I believe is inappropriate. I acted quickly and swiftly, Mr. Speaker, to deal with it. Mr. Speaker, at any time when I have made a mistake, I have no problem apologizing to the people of this province. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, even with you putting a ruling in this House suggesting that the member misled this House about my language in this place, she's still unwilling to stand up and say, I'm sorry. Why is it so hard for some members of this House to just apologize?
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of taking the actions that Nova Scotia expect, many Nova Scotians are still wondering why did the Premier put the member for Dartmouth East back in the Cabinet in the first place in July when there were so many questions still outstanding and so many issues unresolved, Mr. Speaker. So I'll just ask the Premier directly, why did he put the member for Dartmouth East back in his Cabinet in July when there were so many issues unresolved?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. As I've said many times in this House, last December, the member from Dartmouth East was an alleged victim of an assault. In a case, Mr. Speaker, he had had a number of death threats that had been provided to him, that had been sent to him. Members of this House would have seen the security following him around. Mr. Speaker, he had raised health issues as well. So I went to the member at that time and said to him, he either takes a leave or I'm going to provide him a leave, Mr. Speaker. And I told him at the time, when he felt his health had returned, to let me know. I'd put him back in the queue. of all members when it came to coming back in the Executive Council. That's what took place, Mr. Speaker. He's no longer a member of this Executive Council or in our caucus, Mr. Speaker, because on the day that he evoked a privilege which is obscure to many Nova Scotians and used by members of this House, he gave me false information that was provided. He said that was provided to him from the clerk. When, Mr. Speaker, everyone who sits around my executive table, I have to be able to trust what they tell me. When I couldn't, I removed him not only from that table but from our caucus.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the return to Cabinet in July seemed strange enough at the time. But now, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians know that many issues were unresolved at that time, including what the member for Dartmouth East would do when he was faced with the trial which was supposed to occur earlier this fall, Mr. Speaker. That member spoke to the senior-most member of the Premier's office about how he expected that trial to go away, and in fact it did. So I asked the Premier, why didn't he wait until the legal issues were resolved for the member of Dartmouth East before returning him to Cabinet?
The Honourable Premier.
So let me get this straight, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Conservative Party should suggest that every alleged victim in this province should be forced to sit idly by while they wait for a court proceeding to go forward? Is that what he's suggesting? That an alleged victim of anything in this province should put their life on hold? Mr. Speaker, I did what I said I would do, Mr. Speaker. When the honourable member came back and suggested to me that health was returned, I would look at him like all other members to come back in this Executive Council. I had no idea what was happening with the court proceeding, Mr. Speaker. That is something the justice system will carry out, do its due diligence, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member in this House used a obscure law that every Nova Scotian believes was inappropriate, Mr. Speaker, and he misled me in this House, Mr. Speaker, and I acted quickly and swiftly, as Nova Scotians expect me to do.
The Honourable Acting Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when making decisions of public importance, government must ask themselves what's in the public interest. Do the benefits outweigh the risks? Through a Freedom of Information request, we've obtained a briefing note on P3s prepared for the Premier's office by the Deputy Minister of Health, which I will table, Mr. Speaker. In it, there are 4 redacted lines about the benefits of public-private partnerships and 45 redacted lines about the risks associated with P3 models. So my question for the Premier is this: could he please inform members of the House of the risks that are associated with the 3P model for public infrastructure?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. A P3 model is a potential opportunity to build infrastructure in this province. It's a relationship between government and private sector, Mr. Speaker. We've seen it where it's worked in this province and other parts of Canada, Mr. Speaker. Are there challenges associated with it? Obviously, the contracts have to be built properly to make sure that it's in the best interest of taxpayers. We review them to see if it's whether or not we go the P3 model or whether we build it ourselves, Mr. Speaker. But the fact of the matter is, when we build buildings ourselves, we haven't done a great job at it. All I have to think is the Truro Hospital, Mr. Speaker, when it was budgeted for, and then I looked up where we ended up. All of these things have challenges. The appropriate thing is that the due diligence is done at the beginning, at the front end, and everyone knows what the parameters are when you go through it.
The Honourable Acting Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, there are substantial warning signs about the worth of a P3 model for public infrastructure. Auditor Generals right across the country have questioned the fiscal reasons for taking the P3 route. The new federal government of Canada has removed the Harper government's P3 screening requirement for public infrastructure projects. Now we have learned that a deputy minister in the Premier's government has raised concerns in a briefing note to the Premier about a P3 model. So my question for the Premier is this: given the volume of evidence against P3s, why is his government considering this route for public infrastructure in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's important for the honourable member to recognize that Nova Scotians gave us the privilege to govern this province, Mr. Speaker, and by doing so, they've asked us to look at all options when it comes to building infrastructure, when it comes to providing services to people of this province, and that's exactly what we intend to do, to go out to find the pros, the cons associated with any venture we go into, Mr. Speaker. It was their government that approved the convention centre, which is a P3 project. Why are they so opposed to P3 projects when they go ahead and do it, Mr. Speaker? What happened when they crossed the floor?
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotians were shocked this summer to learn that the Premier had hired a corporation as his senior deputy minister, B.F. Miller Services Incorporated. Everyone knows that the reason for that company was to save money, to give a tax break to that one person, a tax break that is not available to the rest of us who are asked to pay our fair share, Mr. Speaker. Why did the Premier give such a special tax break to his senior deputy minister?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. Mr. Speaker, I want to also thank Mr. Miller for committing to public service on behalf of the people of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker. He's doing an outstanding job on behalf of the people of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, and to suggest that he's not paying taxes in the province is completely inaccurate. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, we were the ones that lowered the dividend credit that government complained about the fact we were doing, Mr. Speaker. They were the very party that complained in the House, Mr. Speaker, that we actually closed the gap, Mr. Speaker. That's what you get from that side of the House, Mr. Speaker. Complaint after complaint without a single reason to move this province forward. And let me be clear, Mr. Miller is paying taxes in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, everything the Premier said would be accurate if he'd actually hired Mr. Miller as a person, like all the rest of us are hired, Mr. Speaker, in this province, but he didn't. He hired B.F. Miller Incorporated, a small business specifically designed to pay less tax than every other Nova Scotian. Those are the facts, Mr. Speaker. That's what happened. Instead of just hiring the person, Mr. Speaker, he created a special tax structure to pay less than the rest of us. It may be in Nova Scotia, but it's not the same amount that every other Nova Scotian is asked to pay. The Premier once said, Mr. Speaker, outside this chamber, he does not want to have two classes of workers in this province. So why did he go ahead and create two? One for Bernie Miller Incorporated and another for all the rest of us.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member knows what he's saying is completely inaccurate. We did not create any possibility, Mr. Speaker. Every small business owner in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, can do that. Is that member saying in this province we should be putting more pressure and closing small businesses in Nova Scotia, that no small business owner in Nova Scotia should ever be involved with government? No small business owner has the talent to be able to come into the public service to help us deliver services in Nova Scotia? Is that what you're saying? Are you against small business owners in this province? Are you against small business people?
The Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is also for the Premier. The government has been telling Nova Scotians everyone must tighten their belts. Everyone must feel the pain. And yet, hot on the heels of a $42,000 office renovation for his own office, we learned that the Premier has spent $75,000 to renovate a new cabinet room. This at a time when the government is cutting funding to many community organizations. So my question for the Premier today is, why are snazzy offices more important than community organizations?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. As I said to him, and actually he would know, he visited my office, Mr. Speaker, with his daughter. When he brought his daughter to work and I invited him over, he should come. The only change in my office, Mr. Speaker, the only change in my office, Mr. Speaker, is a door. It's not $42,000 change to my door. There was renovations done, Mr. Speaker, in one government place. The only thing in my office was a doorway, Mr. Speaker. It wasn't $42,000. Furthermore, to the changes in the cabinet room, Mr. Speaker, as you would know, the Speaker's office required a committee room, Mr. Speaker. We now have a committee room in one government place where all members of this House get a privilege to come in and sit at committees and talk to Nova Scotians. Those renovations were made, Mr. Speaker. Cabinet has to have a place to meet, Mr. Speaker. He will never have to worry about that situation, Mr. Speaker. But at future days, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear, Mr. Speaker. Let me be clear, Mr. Speaker. There are people who will be given the privilege to be in the Executive Council, Mr. Speaker, and they need a meeting room.
The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I appreciate the Premier's concern over what I'm concerned about. I think the Premier has plenty to be concerned about himself, sir. Thank you very much. When Nova Scotians fix up a room in their home, they try to get the best bang for their buck. And that means looking for the best price for things. And looking at the budget for the cabinet renovation, it's hard to believe the government looked for a bargain. The bill for painting alone in this room, $20,000. Does the Premier believe that a $20,000 paint job for a boardroom is a respectful use of taxpayer dollars, or is it a snow job?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. The reality of it, Mr. Speaker, this is space that the people of the province of Nova Scotia own, Mr. Speaker. The renovations that were done by hard-working public servants, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the people of Nova Scotia. The honourable member would know that. Is he suggesting, Mr. Speaker, that the people that work for the people of Nova Scotia are incapable of renovating an office space? Or would he prefer, Mr. Speaker, that we went out and rented a piece of space and left that one vacant?
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. The Old Capital District Health Authority had a plan to replace the Centennial Building, which with construction to begin in 2016, and I'll table that, Mr. Speaker. We hear from the Minister of Health last week about a new plan with the new hospital, a plan that may be a public-private partnership or a P3 model. So I'd like to ask the Minister, is the P3 model the Minister considering for the construction of the new hospital, the delivery of health services, or both?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As the Premier has referenced already today, in our tight fiscal times, we will look at all options to provide the QE2 facilities for the future. We know in this province that we have some very strong examples where P3 works very well, Scotia Surgery. We also know that TriStar, the emergency medical vehicles, is again a P3 arrangement, and I believe the former government put Strongest Families in place with a private delivery of that service.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, in a government briefing note titled Public-Private Partnership in Healthcare, which I'll table, Mr. Speaker, there are 4 completed redacted lines about the benefits, 4, and 45 redacted lines about the risks, 45, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Health has already spoken about what he sees as some of the benefits of the public-private partnership in healthcare, but, Mr. Speaker, what are the risks?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. From my time, I guess, in public office, but also as a citizen of Nova Scotia, we have examples in both ways of constructing buildings where, in fact, the construction has been of a poor quality. The best price has not been garnered. We have examples in both areas. So I think to say one can't work, if a private-public partnership can't work, is something I certainly don't believe in.
The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you today is to the Minister of Municipal Affairs. Mr. Speaker, as is well known by the Minister, we have been having I don't want to call it a dispute, but an ongoing issue in Windsor West Hants around amalgamation. We've had the Citizens Coalition, the ARC group, come together and put a petition together asking residents to sign in an effort to be amalgamated in our area. And I'll read just a part of that, Mr. Speaker. We, the undersigned election municipality West Hants, believe our municipal governance structure cannot achieve the best results for our region due to the lack of cooperation between the municipality of West Hants and the town of Windsor. We'll list a number of examples, Mr. Speaker. I wonder at what point, once this bit of a unique piece is filed, where does the government get involved? And I'll table that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question. I think it's very exciting that we have seen local community groups being leaders when it comes to pushing for structural change in our province, Mr. Speaker. There is no better scenario than in West Hants and Windsor why amalgamations need to happen in some areas. And to see a grassroots movement moving in that direction at the community level, I think, shows a great spirit in that community to look towards the future and identify what they need to do to change. And, Mr. Speaker, we will be a partner with that group and all levels of government that want to be a part of that change as well.
The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the minister's answer. The document I just tabled has 2,500 plus signatures on it, and I'm sure there'll be more to come of those who are interested in that amalgamation to take place. Being that a third party, if you will, is part of tabling this application, is there a legislative change? I know the MGA is specific to how municipal partnerships work. Where this is a third party, is there a piece of legislation where within the MGA section of that that could be amended or changed, etc., to allow the province to become a funding partner and support, as we've seen in other amalgamations or dissolutions, etc.?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Any municipal governments that are interested in structural change, whether it's amalgamation, dissolution, what have you, they can find a partner in our government, a funding partner on occasion as well. I know that the member opposite has been a champion for change in his community, Mr. Speaker. He's been a champion for reason, and I want to thank him for pushing this issue locally. And also, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank that member for, at a time when we have both leaders of the opposition standing up and dragging this House through a soap opera, the likes of which this House has not seen in a long time, that member stands up and speaks on behalf of his community, and all in this House could learn from his example.
The honourable member for Sydney River, Myra, Lewisburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the opposite side of the House for that nice, warm welcome. Mr. Speaker, my question through you will be to the Minister of TIR. Nova Scotia's fire services are instrumental to the safety of our homes and our communities. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I have 16 fire departments that serve my constituency. We understand that the Fire Service Association of Nova Scotia is concerned about a number of issues which they recently brought forward to the attention of this government. A number of rural Nova Scotia volunteer fire departments are prevented from performing important training because of highway weight restrictions. My question to the Minister is, does the Minister intend to make any changes this spring that will allow fire departments to do their training?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do want to thank the member for the question. We all would certainly agree, all of us in the House and all Nova Scotians, the importance of the fire services of Nova Scotia and the protection they give to our people. And Mr. Speaker, to be clear, those services are exempt from any restrictions when there is a fire, so it is only with respect to training and preparation for the fire services. Shortly after they met with our caucus in mid-October, about 2 weeks later, the fire services representatives met with my senior officials, Dan Leopold, to discuss some of these things. We are committed to working together. We are going to look at the changes. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing that takes precedence over fire services and what they do in the community. So we are going to take those, have those conversations, take their suggestions, and we're going to do everything we possibly can to make sure that we reflect in our policies and in our laws the exact things that the association is looking for. Thank you.
The honourable member for Sydney River, Myra, Lewisburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister for that answer because fire services are important, especially in rural Nova Scotia, so that's a positive answer, and I appreciate it. Another issue that concerns firefighters is the poor communication between TIR and Nova Scotia emergency providers. Knowing that a road is closed or a bridge is out or ferry service isn't operating saves precious minutes when emergency providers are headed to an incident. My question to the Minister would be, will the Minister commit to looking at ways of improving communications between TIR and emergency providers to save time and confusion and hopefully lives?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that is the second issue that the Fire Services Association brought to our department. A lot of what focused around for the conversation, at least, was that informing fire services that are outside maybe the jurisdiction or the area of the particular fire, so bringing in and collaborating with other fire services, volunteer firefighters, so that they're available and get a heads up with respect to the fire. And again, for the road closures, there is a process and procedure in place that allows EMO, fire services, police services to get heads up on roads, restricted roads that are closed. But certainly, again, one of the requests specifically was that we look at that and create a mechanism whereby they have a lot of the control over letting that service, letting the people know when there is restricted areas that they can go in and possibly opening them up. So that is on the agenda, and we'll do everything we can with communications as well. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, I want to acknowledge and thank the Minister for visiting Trenton and meeting with the Hillside Trenton Environmental Group on September the 28th. 1 week after this meeting, I received a request to visit the Hillside area to once again personally witness a heavy covering of fly ash that has plagued the area of Hillside, Trenton, Pictou Landing and surrounding area. My question to the Minister, will the Minister give an update of any progress that has occurred since the September meeting?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yes, as the member opposite has pointed out, I did meet with the concerned citizens from Trenton, Hillside in particular, that live close to the Trenton plant, and I certainly got a great insight into a wide variety of concerns that they presented on that occasion. And on November 3rd, I met with the CEO, Bob Hanf, of Nova Scotia Power to present those concerns to him.
The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, following the election, this particular group met with the former Environment and Energy Ministers, and they told the Hillside Trenton Group this issue was a top priority. They have been seeking help and solutions that have affected their properties, vehicles, gardens, and orchards receiving coatings of fly ash. Their main concern is the possibility of health side effects from these emissions. My question to the Minister, will the Minister initiate an independent study to determine what impact, if any, the fly ash emissions could have on the health of the residents living in this area?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for that question. But I also, at this point, will get a follow-up from the CEO of Nova Scotia Power, Bob Hanf, in terms of what I presented. I'm sure it's information that, for the most part, he's very familiar with, but I certainly want to see his reaction to my meeting. I also know that the date for the industrial permit is also coming very, very close in the next month or so. Again, we'll be in touch with the residents once we see where those two reports bring us.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal, and I will table a briefing note prepared by the Premier's Office on public-private partnerships. It states, and I quote, an estimated more than $300 million in tolls were produced on the Cobequid Pass for a deal in which private financiers put up $66 million. The government is paying an effective interest rate of 10% over 30 years, twice its rate of borrowing, end of quote. Given this information, Mr. Speaker, and the government's own briefing note, why is the minister contemplating building more P3 toll highways?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member for the question. Certainly with respect to the Cobequid Pass, from a funding perspective and from a policy perspective, Mr. Speaker, the amounts collected through the tolls, through the user fees, they pay the bills, they pay the operational costs, and they go into the corporation, which covers the finances of a tolling area and a corridor that's extremely expensive and extremely valuable for our safety, Mr. Speaker, for our mobility of the province, and certainly for the economy. There's no cookie cutter for P3s, Mr. Speaker. There's a number of different aspects that go into policies with respect to the Cobequid Pass. That decision was made a long time ago, Mr. Speaker. I know that the people who travel through that corridor, who use it from businesses to residents, to everyday users, Mr. Speaker, think that's a success in terms of its ability to pay, in terms of the safety for that roadway, the maintenance that's done there, Mr. Speaker. So that's a particular policy that I think is a pretty strong one, but again, it's case-by-case basis when it comes to P3 models. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Queen Shelburne.
Mr. Speaker, in the Freedom of Information response obtained by the NDP caucus, the Department of Transportation provided 17 pages of blacked-out information related to P3 partnerships. That 17 pages, blacked-out pages, were a presentation on tolling 9 P3 highways. Mr. Speaker, will the minister make this full presentation available so that the independent body can evaluate and assess a long-term impact to Nova Scotians on going down the P3 highways once again?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the messages that we get repeatedly from Nova Scotians with respect to our 100 Series highway is the idea of safety, Mr. Speaker. What can we do to improve safety, to enhance safety for all of us, Mr. Speaker? Those of us in the House, many Nova Scotians, our family and friends who use the highways. We embarked on a cutting-edge, first-of-its-kind feasibility study, Mr. Speaker. Not only will give us the information required, but it will also give public consultation, so the people of Nova Scotia will have their say, Mr. Speaker. We're not imposing that on anyone, Mr. Speaker. We're going to get the information, we're going to give it to the people who put us here, and we'll let them decide and provide the feedback, Mr. Speaker. There's nothing wrong with that approach.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is also to the Minister of TIR. As we know, the St. Peters Junction to Sydney section of the railway has been shut down. The Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal has been doing all he can to help save the rail line. In a September 22nd, 2014 article in the Cape Breton Post, the Liberal MP for Sydney Victoria said, and I quote, "We see the government helping other short lines remain open in other parts of Canada, and we should be seeing the same here." And I'll table that article, Mr. Speaker. My question is, what conversations have been taking place with the federal government and the member for Sydney Victoria now that the government has changed?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member across the hall for that question. Look, the consistent message we have had, I certainly have had with respect to Cape Breton Rail, is that the ideal situation, Mr. Speaker, is that we have a private sector entity operate this line, and it supports a business model at the Port of Sydney and elsewhere in the Cape Breton region to provide real traffic, Mr. Speaker. We're still there, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the legislation that was supported on the rail line by all parties. With all the activities we've done around the rail, we need to find that private sector player to run this line. Having said that, when there's discussions with the federal government, with our municipal partners, and of course for the province, we'll do everything we can to support that. But where we're at now is where we were with day one. We want the private sector to run this rail line. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Mr. Speaker, we know that the rail line operated with a subsidy from the provincial government and was breaking even with that subsidy. The MP then asked the Transportation Minister what she would do to save the line, and she said the federal government is not going to be involved in keeping this line open. The response from the MP at the time, Mr. Speaker, that the minister's answer was unacceptable. Has the minister given reassurances that the MP will get an acceptable answer now that the federal Liberals are in power?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this point, there's literally zero traffic on the line. There was a few hundred, 500 per year, prior to the decision for Genesee, Wyoming to discontinue and ultimately file for abandonment, Mr. Speaker. We're a long way from talking about infrastructure investments if we don't have traffic. If we don't have a business model, these are moot points now. So what we're looking for, we're working with the Port Authority, the Port Development officials, the Mayor, the CBRM, of course our federal partners who are there at the table with us. But, Mr. Speaker, we've got to create the case and look at what business options are out there. Then we can talk about infrastructure, we can talk about investment. But until we get to that point, Mr. Speaker, there's no one responsible for doing the infrastructure improvements and upgrades that are required on the Sydney subdivision until we have traffic on the line. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. The short-stay mental health unit at the Aberdeen Hospital was supposed to reopen on November 3rd. Today is the 27th, and it hasn't reopened, and there's no sign that it's going to happen anytime soon. Today is the 26th. Sorry, a little difference in what's happening here. Yesterday, during adjournment debate, in speaking about this unit, the member for Halifax-Chebucto said the NSHA told us it was a temporary closure, and we expect NSHA to recruit professionals they need to reopen the facility. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, members in the community are telling me that the job postings for the positions in this unit have been removed. So it's a little hard to recruit if you're not actually posting for jobs. So my question for the minister today is this government recruiting for those positions or not?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What I can convey to the member opposite is that the Nova Scotia Health Authority is responsible for the recruitment of clinicians, and as of last week, when I had my briefing, I was basically informed about the work that is going on in Pictou as a result of the closure. I hadn't asked about, nor was I presented with where the status is on recruitment.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that response. I'm concerned to hear that the minister is not checking on the status of recruitment, because we've been led to believe this is completely a staffing issue. So you only solve staffing issues with recruitment, Mr. Speaker. So last night in late debate, we also heard that additional temporary hires are being made in the hospital to support the emergency department with mental health professionals. So we're hearing about temporary positions being filled, while the temporary closure shows no signs of stopping. So every indication really points to the fact that this government is leaving the short stay unit closed. That's the concern, Mr. Speaker. So my question for the minister today is, now knowing what he now knows, will he direct the NSHA to make the appropriate arrangements and hire the appropriate staff so that the short stay unit can be reopened just as he has promised it will be?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And in terms of the overall plan of mental health delivery for the province, that is in the hands of the Nova Scotia Health Authority. I have every confidence in Dr. Corey and the work that she is doing to know what the citizens of our province need. And I know that in terms of the work of Dr. Vino in Pictou, the right solutions for mental health now and for the future. And when I look at the delivery of mental health in the home, yes, a leading practice that is now taking place in Pictou. And I know also with the development of the emergency room, there will be separate triaging for those in trauma and mental health crisis, which again will be state-of-the-art for Pictou County. Thank you.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. When questioned about various Provincial Auditor General's concerns about the public-private partnership, the Health Minister said that he supports them, stating, and I quote, "P3 models have served this province very well," and cited the Scotia surgery as an example, Mr. Speaker, and I'll table that. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister of Health tell us why he believes that P3 models have served Nova Scotia well?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We know that in terms of providing health services in the province, there are only 4 examples that I'm familiar with. These are 4 that have actually served our province very, very well, some for a number of years, some more recent, such as the Strongest Families program, which has a private deliverer of mental health service. Medtronic, again, which procurement of defibrillators. Those partnerships have worked extremely well in our province, and I think it's important to be open to that possibility. We know that, I think the member opposite knows that as a government, we have made no such commitment, but it's part of the investigative process.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to table a briefing note prepared by the Deputy Minister of Health, and he writes, I quote, "Another criticism of the P3s where a private clinic is contracted to provide publicly insured services is that the private clinic does simple surgeries, leaving the more complex cases for the public health system. The public system is burdened with more complex care. This means that any cost savings that come from the reduced overall number of surgeries are clawed back by the increased cost of those complex surgeries." End quote, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, given that his own deputy minister has raised concerns about the P3 projects, why is the minister potentially considering a public-private partnership for the new hospital or even healthcare delivery in the province?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What I know at this stage is that we've made a considerable change in the way that all capital construction projects will go on from this day forward. We know that we've had some situations where both the cost, the quality of the build did not have the kind of oversight, whether it was a private or public building. We've now put in place a process where stage gating will require a company, both in terms of meeting the financials as well as the quality, will be required throughout every build from this time forward.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Immigration. The federal government has promised 25,000 Syrian refugees by Christmas. They've since realized that is not practical, but when these refugees do come, they will need our help with health services, with career planning services. What specific funding will the province offer to help?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the question. Nova Scotia is ready to do its part and to share responsibility and work with the federal government as well as all provinces in this country. We've had extensive discussions and extensive cooperations from all across government here in the province, as well as our settlement organizations, local groups, all our partners, and we have discussions with the federal government, and at this point in time it is our expectation that the federal government will be paying for the settlement resources for the refugees that are coming. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, it is good to hear that there are funds being made available. Those who come to Nova Scotia will need to feel valued, and their first experience when they do come here has to be a good one. Within 2 weeks, will the minister table a plan of action that shows the federal funding that will be coming forward and how it will, the province, how it will use that funding to retain these people as contributing citizens of our province? Because, Mr. Speaker, I believe they deserve that opportunity.
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The situation is one that is unfolding. Every single day there's more and more information that we are learning, and I'm very happy to say that I've had 3 conversations already with my federal counterpart. We also had a telephone conference call yesterday with all our federal, provincial, territorial ministers. I have officials going to Toronto this weekend to obtain more information, so I've already told the media and told the public that we will be providing information as we have it. So definitely we will be doing that once the information becomes available. We've been working across government departments with the Canadian Red Cross, with our Y-Reach partners across the province, with ISANS, with all of the SAPs, the service providers, and so there's extensive work that's going on. Thanks very much.
The Honourable Member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. Nova Scotia students lag behind other provinces in math and reading scores. Mr. Speaker, the Freeman report in November, followed by an action plan released in January, offered the public a glimpse of possible improvements. In a CBC article dated October 30th, 2014, it states, "Yesterday the minister said she wasn't interested in simply tinkering with a system that has been through too many small changes in recent years." My question to the minister, wouldn't a collective agreement without key education reform be considered tinkering?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the member for the question.
I'm very proud to stand here as the Minister of Education to acknowledge that education has become a priority for our government. We recognize that 19,000 Nova Scotians told us that we needed to look at change. We embraced that. We brought teachers in who are those who deliver the change in the classroom, and the change was designed by teachers to respond to the very concerns that have been raised about math and literacy in this province. And, Mr. Speaker, we are moving forward with the action plan.
The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And education is a priority, I think, of all parties in the House, and I'm very happy to hear that it's the priority of the present government. The government traded everything that would positively impact students in exchange for teacher salary increases. In the minister's own press release, she is quoted as saying, "I look forward to reviewing the report and creating an action plan for change." And I'll table that, Mr. Speaker. Seeing as there has been nearly a year for review, my question for the minister: if this deal is voted down, will the minister recommit to the educational reform that actually impacts students as presented in the Freeman report?
Order, please. Time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers have expired. Just before we'll move on to government business, the Honourable Minister of Labour on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to draw the members' attention to the East Gallery, where I have a couple of constituents joining us today, Peter and Hope McIntosh. Hope is here to learn more about how government works, and I would like the honourable members to give them a warm welcome here in the House. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to let them know that I'll join them as soon as the whip lets me out of here, because he's really tough. Thank you.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Should please call government business bills, public bills for second reading.
Just before we do that, the Honourable Acting Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in my place on a point of order. Mr. Speaker, during question period, the Premier indicated that that you had ruled, in fact, that I had misled the House, and that subsequently to that I had refused to apologize. Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that was your ruling at all, that there was any misleading of the House. I also believe that the allegation of misleading the House is unparliamentary. And, Mr. Speaker, I would ask you to look into that and review the transcripts and make your decision to the House, which is the proper thing to do, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Apparently, the two hardest words to say in the English language remain the two hardest words to say, according to the interim leader. Mr. Speaker, would you please call public bills for second reading?
We'll now call public bills for second reading.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 130, Community of Sackville Landfill Compensation Act?
We'll now call Bill number 130, the Community of Sackville Landfill Compensation Act. The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I move that Bill number 130, an Act to amend Chapter 71 of the Acts of 1993, the Community of Sackville Landfill Compensation Act, be read for a second time. Mr. Speaker, in government terms, these would be considered to be housekeeping amendments. The changes we are proposing today are a direct result of a request that was brought forward from HRM to clarify language around this particular act. Specifically, HRM wants to clarify the definition of bursary, to authorize that funding from the Community of Sackville Landfill Compensation Fund be awarded as bursaries to students in this community. And, Mr. Speaker, the third amendment makes these changes retroactive to 1993. So for the sake of the House, just a bit of history here. The community of Sackville was given a trust in 1993 in response to the fact that they had been the site of one of the old-style landfills, Mr. Speaker. It was decided by the board that's involved in this group that the money that was given to them in trust thanking them for being the home to this site would be given out in bursaries to community members, Mr. Speaker. So it's been brought to our attention that HRM does not believe that the language is clear enough to ensure that future students can receive these bursaries, Mr. Speaker. We believe that bursaries, particularly ones that are targeted to people in a community that need financial assistance, are absolutely critical. So we are very happy to partner with HRM, bring these amendments forward, Mr. Speaker, so that this community organization can continue to provide support for students who want to seek a post-secondary education and improve their position in life. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise today and speak briefly to this bill, 130. It is my understanding that the community of Sackville invested a portion of the total landfill compensation fund in 1993 for the purposes of bursaries for students pursuing post-secondary education and has already been distributing this financial support to students. I am pleased to see that this bill officially authorizes these bursaries and allows the community to decide on criteria for the bursary for students from the Sackville area and to continue to provide financial support to students pursuing post-secondary education. I think we would all agree that this is a good bill to move forward, and more or less it is a housekeeping bill, but I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to it.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do have just a few comments on this bill. We do support this piece of legislation. It does what the minister has indicated. I think it clarifies what the practice has been for a couple of decades now. The result of a fund that came through the community of Sackville hosting a landfill for many years. And after the closure of that site, there was $500,000 placed in a trust that would go to future bursaries for students from Sackville High and Millwood High. And that has taken place every year on graduation, that students who have graduated from the community have an opportunity to receive those bursaries to further their education. And I know it's been greatly appreciated by all those who have received that, and greatly appreciated by the community for ensuring that the compensation that was awarded because of hosting the dump for so long has gone to a great cause. And I know many who have benefited from that have gone on to further their education and have been and they have contributed immensely back to our province. So we do support this, and I look forward to it going through the process of the House.
The honourable member for Sackville-Beaverbank.
Mr. Speaker, I stand in my place today and I would like to share a few words concerning the amendments to the Sackville Landfill Compensation Act. On Tuesday, November the 24th of this week, my distinguished colleague, the Minister of Municipal Affairs, introduced amendments to the Sackville Landfill Compensation Act. These amendments are intended to provide Halifax Regional Municipality clear authority to award bursaries to graduates in the community of Sackville. The amendments to the Sackville Landfill Compensation Act will update and clarify the definitions in the Act to reflect changes within the municipality since the legislation was put in place. The amendments clarify that the bursary fund is for the benefit of the community of Sackville, therefore allowing students the continued ability to apply for support toward their post-secondary studies. The Sackville Bursary Fund was created in June of 1994, making the amendments retroactive will verify the municipality's authority to make prior and future awards. Mr. Speaker, the Sackville landfill site closed, and I want to emphasize the word closed, in December of 1996 after 18 years of operation. I would also like to add to those 18 years that they were difficult years for many residents of Sackville, especially those living in close proximity to what we refer to as the dump. Mr. Speaker, out of those 18 long years, something good came from those many years of frustration, and that is the Sackville Landfill Compensation Act. In an interview, Councillor Brad Johns of District 4 said, I think it has been a wonderful asset to the community of Sackville as a whole over the past 20 years. There has been many opportunities for community projects that would have never seen reality if it wasn't for the compensation money set aside. Further, many have benefited in receiving funds toward their post-secondary education. Again, these amendments to Bill number 130 will update and clarify the definitions in the Act to reflect changes within the municipality since the legislation was put into place, and will further clarify that the bursary fund is for the benefit of the community of Sackville. The plan is to enable students to continue the ability to apply for support toward their post-secondary education. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Time to recognize the Honourable Minister of Community Affairs, Municipal Affairs. It will be to close second reading on Bill number 130, the Community of Sackville Landfill Compensation Act.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleagues for their comments and support of this bill, particularly our colleague on this side, who I know is from the area and has experienced some of the effects of the history of this bill. With that said, Mr. Speaker, I move to close debate.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 130, the Community of Sackville Landfill Compensation Act. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 130, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 71 of the Acts of 1993, the Community of Sackville Landfill Compensation Act.
Ordered that the bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 131, the Parenting and Support Act?
We'll have Bill number 131, the Maintenance and Custody Act. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I would perhaps just clarify why that is, that there's been a little confusion. The Act itself will be renaming the Maintenance and Custody Act. But right now, until we pass it, it is the Maintenance and Custody Act. And that is a great example, Mr. Speaker, of why we need to change this Act. Its language is archaic. It's not conducive to helping people at a difficult time in their lives when there is family breakup. But before I begin, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move that we actually, now that it be the Act, the Maintenance and Custody Act, be now read a second time, because we must put that on the record before we go on about the details in the Act. So thank you. I know the clerk is happy when we get that out exactly. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, these amendments are going to modernize and update the language in the Act. It will also include renaming the legislation as the Parenting and Support Act. And I hope that very soon that is what will roll off our tongues rather than maintenance and custody, as is currently the state. The new name, along with revised language throughout and new definitions and terminology, will help to properly put the focus of the Act on protecting the best interests of children. I think everyone in the House understands that being a parent is a hard job at the very best of times, and it becomes so much more complicated and difficult when parents are separating and they no longer live under the same roof. The changes that we are proposing in this bill will make our family laws clearer and more effective in guiding families that are navigating these very many challenges that come with a family breakup. This legislation will also give guidance to the courts and to others in the legal community as they help to provide advice and support to families that are going through this difficult time. We know that separation and divorce are difficult and emotional situations for families, and they are especially hard on children. We want to make sure that the law doesn't make it any more confusing or complicated. It is my expectation, Mr. Speaker, that this legislation will provide families with the support that they need to ensure the best interests of their children are always put first when parenting decisions are being made. We have consulted widely and taken the advice of our expert advisory panel, which include legal and court representatives as well as members of the public. The changes included in this bill represent one more step in what has been a 5-year process to, we call it at the Department the Family Law Reform Project. And Mr. Speaker, that is a big project. It's ongoing. There'll be more work to be done because we really want to review all of our laws that relate to family and family law and make it more accessible, more available to people to understand, using more regular English, if I could say, so that it doesn't become obscure and difficult for people to understand. And the reason for that, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's important for members of the House to know that certainly in my new role as Justice Minister, I've learned a lot about the courts. I'm learning a lot more as time goes along. But it's really very distressing to know how many people have to go to court that are unrepresented. And although we have a wonderful legal aid system, they can't represent many of the people. They don't meet the criteria, or they don't fall into that category. And we have people who can't afford to engage their own lawyers. And that means they're struggling to prepare to go to court, often in very contentious times, to make their case about their children and how they'll be cared for and who gets responsibility or primary responsibility. And it becomes very difficult. And I hope that the language that we'll be putting into the Act will make it a little bit easier. There'll be more guidance. There'll be more of an ability for a citizen of Nova Scotia without legal training to pick up the Act and understand what they need to do to prepare. And I know that throughout the justice system, all the players are doing their utmost, Mr. Speaker, to be able to assist people, to provide some legal advice. We have a new legal clinic that's begun once a week with lawyers providing their time, free of charge to people. We're trying to do more and more on that access to justice. But I want the members of the House and the public to understand that making these changes to this Act, which are a lot have to do with terminology and language, are part of that access to justice issue. And we're doing our part through the Family Law Reform Project. So I think that's very important. Just to let members know, previously there were amendments to the Act in 2012, and now again in the spring of 2014. In 2014, under our government, those changes were changes to grandparent access and application provisions, which were introduced and passed at that time. And many members of the House will know that grandparents have spoken out loudly and had in the past wanted to have more recognition in law when it came to family breakup, and that was done in 2014. So, as I said, Mr. Speaker, this is another step in that continuum of changes that we've made to the Act. These amendments highlight the importance of clarifying the responsibilities of each parent, and they also bring Nova Scotia in line with what many other Canadian jurisdictions have already done. So we're bringing our Act, modernizing it, and bringing it up to a higher standard. One of the areas, Mr. Speaker, that's dealt with in this legislation is the question of relocation. So we live in an ever more mobile society. More and more people are moving for work or for other reasons, for education. They leave our province and go elsewhere. And with that in mind, it's happening in other jurisdictions as well. We've actually addressed the question of relocation when the families or the parents are going to be living in different locations. This has, as you can appreciate, and I know all members can appreciate, a tremendous impact on children. So the legislation now, for the first time, will provide guidance to families and courts faced with the challenges that arise when one parent or guardian wants to relocate with the child or children. As we can all appreciate, Mr. Speaker, this is especially traumatic for the children and for the parent left behind, especially if that parent is substantially involved in their children's lives. Currently, there are no guidelines to address how to factor in the child's best interests when it comes to relocation. What the bill will do is ensure that the maximum notice be given for any plan to move. It will put the onus on the parents to ensure that a relocation considers the best interests of the child. And these provisions would make Nova Scotia a leader in Canada, Mr. Speaker. So they're very important. Right now, as was said, there is no guidance, no way nothing really to guide you in terms of what the parents can do in the case of a relocation. So somebody really could up and move suddenly and not give any notice to the other family members, to the other parent, and not even discuss how this is working for the children. Now, if the families can't come to an understanding themselves, the parents, If they can't come together and come to an understanding, there's now a recourse to come before the courts and make your case as to why you believe the child should, or the family should not move and the child should stay, or if you're the parent who wants to move with the child, you'd have to make a case as to why you are taking the child and why it's in the best interest of the child. And you'll hear me say that quite often in my remarks about this bill and many others if they have to do with children. We're talking about what is in the best interest of the children, and that has become enshrined more and more in our legislation. It's a term we're using here. We're using it in an act that's come before us from the Community Services Minister as well. And it's very important. I think it's a shift in how we think about children, and it's not so much of the language that we used previously, Mr. Speaker, related to property issues. And we want to personalize and humanize the language that we use when we're talking about children and our access to children, our time spent with children. So the relocation, as I say, is a very important one. I want members to know that we would be among the first to address this, and we've addressed it in a way different from the other provinces that have started to. We think we're using best practices in this regard. With our amendments, we're also introducing provisions for the use of parenting plans. And I know anybody that's worked in the legal world has heard of these. They have been, in practice, been called for. People have been asked to present parenting plans, but they've never had any recognition in our law. And so we've added that provision here so that they're defined and understood. And really, it's our law catching up with some of the practice that is being asked for by the courts. And what it will do will encourage parents to go through the list of what should be in a parenting plan and address the issues around the children's health, their education, their general well-being, and decide how that's going to be managed going forward. And by doing that, they arrive before the courts better prepared, having worked out some of the issues and having had a chance to think about some of the issues before they come before a judge and get to court. So it's really helpful in the cases that they've thought of these things early on, and it's not left to the end when there's perhaps more conflict or more difficulty. So it really is catching up to best practices and putting this in the law. So, you know, we believe the introduction of parenting plan will be very important. The amendments, as I've said earlier, are going to revise language surrounding parenting responsibilities. So I'd just like to go through a few of those. Specifically, the term custody will be continued in the Act, but it will be given a clear definition as a starting point for understanding. So previously that wasn't there, and it will now have a strong definition. We'll also replace the word access with visiting privileges, and access and visiting privileges, they're both out, with parenting time, contact time, and interaction. Those are the three new terms: parenting time, contact time, and interaction. We'll also update terminology, replacing maintenance and support, maintenance with support. And as I highlighted before, Mr. Speaker, the name of the Act will become the Parenting and Support Act. Our goal here is to shift attention toward parental responsibilities and compassion, and use language that recognizes the importance of keeping the child's best interest at the forefront of all decision-making. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the changes include new enforcement provisions, which will give the court specific options to enforce parenting arrangements under a court order. Coherent, clear legislation helps everyone, Mr. Speaker. Our changes highlight the importance of parental responsibility, respects what's in the best interest of the child, and provides us with guidelines and language that is current and responsive to the needs of families in changing and sometimes challenging times. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to hearing the comments of my colleagues.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, we will be supportive of any activity that makes the difficult situation of family breakup easier. Mr. Speaker, when you look at the detail of this bill, you can see how many issues must be resolved for children in these situations. And, you know, we think about parents each may have different preferences for, you could have different culture, different spiritual upbringing, different heritage. And certainly, I'm sure both parents will want to have an opportunity to raise their child, to instill those values, things that are important to them and that they will want their children to feel are important. So you can see how important this kind of legislation is, and how these changes, we hope, also will help in these situations. We do hear that grandparents groups are supportive. We have heard stories many times about grandparents who their grandchildren may not get access to their own grandparents, and that is an issue. And I know there are some parents that don't want to have to deal with that. I know there's two sides to that coin, but Mr. Speaker, it is a matter that there needs to be some mechanism to have that determined, and to have it determined for both the children and for their grandparents. I also see, Mr. Speaker, the issue of relocation. We live in a province, I know in the rural area I represent, many times young people with young families are having to move away. If there is a family breakup, it could even just mean moving to the city. But Mr. Speaker, in such a situation, that may mean there's a weekly drive back and forth to the city. I know many members drive each week for work, but imagine adding for people who don't have that commitment, but have to add that commitment to their weekly lifestyle in terms of trying to ensure the child gets to see both parents. And I know that's just simple reality, Mr. Speaker, but I know there has to be a mechanism to help to determine how that is going to work. And particularly with this legislation, we're looking at situations where perhaps one of the parents has had to move outside of the province. And of course, we know how common that is. I know in my area how many people are working out west. Some have relocated there, others are back and forth. But this is becoming a more common issue perhaps than it's ever been, Mr. Speaker. And I guess to close, we do look forward to hearing Nova Scotians who may have other ideas, perhaps concerns about this legislation. We look forward to seeing if they will come forward in the Law Amendments Committee when they have an opportunity to do so. But to close, Mr. Speaker, if this legislation helps the system to work better, it may lead to more positive and stable relations between parents who have broken apart. And I can think of nothing other, Mr. Speaker, that would be more beneficial to their children than if things are at least stable and conciliatory for the children's benefit. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a piece of legislation that I have personally dealt with in various versions for many years. I certainly concur with the previous speakers on this issue that the language is sparse and the language is antiquated. The changes, we in our society have been able to trace, I believe, trace the changes that were needed to come into sync with our view of our different views of parenting. We now recognize that it isn't just automatically going to be the mother who gets custody of the children. The father is certainly given full consideration in the courts today. Grandparents are being given consideration for access, and all of these issues are all guided under what's best for the children. I have a tendency, I guess, to look at the legislation as it has evolved through somewhat of a gender lens. While I indicated that historically women were usually awarded custody, that also the laws were not meeting the financial economic needs of the single woman who was raising her children. Oftentimes she was on social assistance, and any amount of her check that she was given in her check was clawed back by any amount that the father was to contribute. In fact, it wasn't uncommon in the courtrooms for the judges to discourage the women from seeking support from the father because of this factor. They were only going to lose out on their social assistance check anyway. It was a frustrating aspect and approach to the practice of law. Things have changed and things have improved. There were instances when legislation simply failed to address issues faced by women when the family broke up. The chances of a woman getting spousal support were very limited. It wasn't until Justice Bertha Wilson came to the Supreme Court of Canada on her leading decision in Moog versus Moog, where she actually ruled that spousal support could be awarded and provided very specific guidelines, which included acknowledging that the mother or the spouse had given up her career in making the decision by both parties for her to stay home and raise the children. And that, believe it or not, sounds pretty trite today, but it was an astounding decision at its time in the late 1989 and early 1990s. But it has been a slow process. Women in this province were unable to get an employment split of their spouses' employment pensions. In fact, we had case law in this province in the 1980s, Clark versus Clark, that specifically prohibited it. And we were the only province in the country with that type of legislation. There was a strong dissent in Clark versus Clark by Justice Nancy Bateman, which the courts essentially just followed. And they did make awards of pension splits in spite of the case law. And eventually, our legislation caught up with that, and now we have legislation that ensures that pensions will be split. And it's not a big issue, but it certainly was in the 80s and 90s. So legislation on family matters has often lagged behind, and particularly, and I believe, as I said, I view it through a gender lens. It is usually often that women who have suffered. So I am very pleased it wasn't just to see the legislation, but it was just, can anyone describe reading legislation as a joyful act? I don't know. But I was really pleased to read the language of the legislation. These amendments are an attempt to create more certainty and hopefully to reduce the courtroom custody battles. For years, the courts have tried to introduce processes that will reduce the amount of contested cases under this particular statute, also under the Divorce Act and various others. But this act and the amendments are an effort to create a certain balance. Do you want to resolve your matter and not go to the courtroom? You can read it. It is user-friendly. A lawyer can give it to their client and say, look, just read through this. This is an easy read. And if it doesn't, and if the client or the party is still unable or unwilling to resolve, it certainly provides the courts with some very specific guidelines, and I think eliminates a lot of surprises for people. The courts have always, and I think the legal profession generally, does encourage people to resolve their matters. It is better, we've always said, it is so much better for you and your partner to resolve your differences rather than having an order judicially imposed. It should be noted, though, as well, that a very high percentage of our cases get resolved. Parents, for the most part, recognize that they will have to make adjustments. They have to be compromising because they know it is in the best interests of their children. The courts have provided family information sessions that are mandatory for the parties. There are 3-hour sessions with a lawyer and a social worker. The primary focus of the session is to bring home to the parents the harm that their parental conflict can have on their children. Resolution is always strongly encouraged. I think this statute provides a lot of information about what the issues might be, what issues will be considered, and will assist them in negotiating their resolution. Now, unfortunately, there are times when resolutions cannot be reached, but I think these amendments are drafted and will provide an aid and a strong framework for the courts to assist the parents in reaching of children who to provide some form of access even in situations of high conflict. And that's been a very touchy issue for the courts in the past, because when you do have maybe one party who is particularly being difficult, for lack of a better word, sometimes it's a concern whether it is in the best interest of the child to have contact with that parent. But I think this legislation provides some creativity and also maybe subtly will provide a bit of a warning to the parent. You need to behave on your and honor your access commitments. And I think there is that part in the legislation too that deals with not only the people who have denied access to the other party, but the people who don't exercise the access, which I think is really, really an interesting aspect. The legislation refers to a process if a parent is seeking to change residence or relocate, if a parent is denied access, and if a parent refuses to exercise access. The new language, parenting time, contact time, interaction, this will allow grandparents or other relatives or step-parents perhaps to maintain some contact. It may be that there will be an order allowing them to, for example, attend school concerts, to get notice of school events or sporting events, to get photographs. And sometimes in all of the anguish and turmoil that's going on, those things might suffice. And sometimes we just don't think about it to examine that, to say, well, for the step-parent or a grandparent, are you okay with that? You get notice of all school events, you'll get photographs and whatever, and that could definitely diffuse a situation. And I think that's what everybody is trying to do. So it also, I believe that I speak obviously I'm very supportive of the work that's been done on this. I do know that my only concern is when I do raise it with the private bar and with the legal aid bar, that for some reason people don't seem to be that familiar with the pending amendments. And I have encouraged them to get up to speed on it and to advise them of the availability of presenting at law amendments. So, but it is important, very important, that the private bar, Nova Scotia Legal Aid, various legal associations like the Canadian Bar Society Family Division, all of those be meaningfully consulted. And I'm hoping that, and I think to a large degree that has taken place, but I also look forward to the comments that will come from Nova Scotians at law amendments. Thank you.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to stand and speak to this bill here today. It gives me an opportunity to summarize what the minister had already spoken about when she presented this bill for second reading. Separation and divorce can be a very, very stressful time at the best of times. It's said that the level of emotion and many of the feelings that people experience are not unlike losing someone to death. It's estimated that over 50% of couples do not access legal advice during divorce, And that's why these amendments, titled now Maintenance and Custody Act, soon to be known as Parenting Support Act, are so important. Many of us, if we haven't experienced divorce and separation ourselves, have friends and family that might have. I've walked through the process with many friends, you know, and they're talking to you about what they're going through, and being a layperson, I wouldn't have any advice for them, just sort of be able to listen. And there is a lot of confusion around the process, so it's great that there's going to be more of an outline, more of a framework for people to follow, take some of the questioning out of the process. Nova Scotians can be very proud that the new provisions will make Nova Scotia a leader in Canada. This bill gives guidance to parents to maneuver through what can be a complex process using clear and up-to-date language, with the end goal in mind for the best outcomes of the children. It requires parenting plans, so both parents understand what to expect of them. This reduces confusion. These proposed amendments reflect modern parenting arrangements and responsibilities. Custody will now be known as access. Visiting privileges will be parenting time, contact time, and interaction. This bill establishes relocation privileges. New guidelines will set out who must prove whether or not the relocation will benefit the child. Grandparents will now have more confirmed access, and they'll be able to get that access without going to the courts to apply for permission. You know, I'm a grandma myself, and I have 3 grandkids and a new one last week, and I can't imagine not having access to my grandchildren. I was fortunate enough to have wonderful grandparents myself, and I had wonderful grandparents to my children, and they became part of the fiber of those children. They're such a part of their life, and grandparents are so important to the outcomes of a child. They can be so positive. It's really, really important that they have access. They can be the wind beneath the child's wings at times, and it's good that this is going to be now in place. It introduces the concept of contact time. The bill also outlines enforcement provisions that would deny parenting time or failing to exercise, as the member from Dartmouth South had already indicated. And the bill also outlines enforcement provisions that would deny parenting time or failing to exercise the parenting time. This bill gives coherent, clear legislation, and it helps everyone. Our changes highlight the importance of parental responsibility, respects what is the best interest of the child, and provides us with guidelines and language that is current and responsive to the needs of family in these changing times. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
If I'm to recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice, it will be to close second reading on Bill number 131, the Maintenance and Custody Act. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the members who have participated as well in this second reading of Bill 131, and I really appreciate the kind words of members from the opposition that supportive of the improvements that this bill embodies. And as I said, it is a process that we're engaged in. It's been going on for 5 years. The first steps began under the NDP government, and I said it was 2012. And I think that there are issues that come before us in the House that we really do need to look at things in a continuum of improvements, and over time we are all working to the same end, that we want to have, in this instance, a better justice system, but in many other things. We want to advance the work of this province, the ability and the opportunities that are available in Nova Scotia, and each of us are working in our own way, and this is one way that we can improve it, and I'm pleased to see the support from the opposition members and an acknowledgement that a lot of work has gone into this to date. I did want to make just a little comment about the consultation that had happened in my opening first reading of the, or second reading of the bill. I did mention that we had an expert advisory panel, but we actually had 9 Nova Scotia experts from legal and court stakeholder groups, and they participated in 3 expert advisory panel forums, so they were held in more than Halifax, to assess the conceptual proposals for this phase of the changes. And a discussion paper was developed, and Nova Scotians were asked to give their views. Over 165 Nova Scotian respondents provided feedback through written responses, meetings, focus groups, and information sessions. So it was quite broad-based. There was an opportunity, and I do hope that all the members in the legal community, certainly as a starting point, will be well aware that this is going through, and we will work with the Bar Society and others to make sure that the changes are well recognized as they move forward, and providing that they are passed, we'll make sure people have that information. But it's very important to me, Mr. Speaker, as the Minister, to be sure that we've done all we can to engage the people most knowledgeable, and that did include families that could speak, members of the public who could speak about their struggles and their difficulty in understanding the acts and in having to represent themselves before the courts when things are not worked out more amicably. And as the member from Dartmouth South said, that in many instances the courts do encourage people to sit down, and I was told just the other day that there are conciliators now made available in many of the courts, and it's encouraged that there be mediation and conciliation before it actually gets to the point. It's really only the most difficult cases now that will come before the courts and have to be determined by a judge. But I think there's some very progressive moves in the changes we talked about, particularly the relocation, which, as we said, was never mentioned before. And now there is a framework to help people work out, what is the best move. And just for everyone's knowledge, I think the most important thing is it says that as soon as a parent knows that there's an impending move, or the move is now on the horizon, they have to speak to the other parent. They have to make sure that they give the maximum amount of notice. We've talked about 60 days being maybe a norm or a good amount, but if you had 3 months notice, you should give 3 months notice. And sometimes these things come up with less time that's available, so that would be understandable if there wasn't enough time. Say it's a job promotion or an opportunity and you had to go quicker, but it's really important that the standard will be you give the maximum notice possible. And that allows the other parent time to consider the impacts, not only on themselves, but on the wider family. As the member from Inverness, not Inverness, sorry, the member from Victoria the Lakes spoke about grandparents, for example. That can be the wider family, the extended family, can be a big factor in how a move will be appreciated or anticipated, and what the impact is on the child. So it isn't just the 2 parents. We have extended family, we have others who care about those children, we have connections to community that need to be considered as well. So, you can't prescribe everything, but you can certainly set out a framework that allows 2 people in difficult times to sit down with their care and concern for their children and try and decide what's the best way to approach an opportunity that has come before one of them. So we think that's a big improvement, and we didn't speak a great deal about the enforcement of access, but that is also a big change to add that into the Act. Right now, certainly we have a Maintenance and Enforcement Act which looks at the financial aspects of a court order, but we don't really have any recourse on the access part. And as the member from Dartmouth South said, sometimes that means a parent who doesn't allow access, and on other times it's a parent who doesn't exercise their right and is not giving the appropriate amount of attention to their children that should be. And there should be some way to go back and either change the order and say if the parent is not there and not willing to access their rights to see the child, then that perhaps needs to change the court order. Something needs to change in that so that it's a clear reflection of the situation. But certainly it means that somebody can't be denied their access because of any other conflict that exists between the couple or among the parents. So it's a different aspect. It will be interesting to see how that works in practice, but I think it's important that we give an avenue for parents who are faced with that very distressing situation, if one or the other, either the lack of access or the failure to exercise the access privilege. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would like to move second reading, and I look forward to hearing from any members of the public that come to law amendments. I'm sure that will be very important to our process as well. Thank you.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 131, the Maintenance and Custody Act. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 131, an act to amend Chapter 160 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Maintenance and Custody Act.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 133, the Motor Vehicle Act?
We'll now call Bill number 133, the Motor Vehicle Act. The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Bill 133, an act to amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act, be now read a second time. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to rise for the second reading of this important bill. Keeping our roads safe is the department's top priority. The Motor Vehicle Act is one of our key pieces of legislation that covers a wide range of subjects. Mr. Speaker, this bill includes 14 amendments. Broadly, they fall into categories of insurance, administration, the graduated driver's license program, and penalties. I would like to take this opportunity to highlight some of them. Mr. Speaker, under the Act, nurse practitioners, optometrists, occupational therapists are similar to doctors in that all of these professions may identify medical issues that could make someone unfit to drive. This bill extends the liability protection currently in place for doctors to these other professions, Mr. Speaker, when reporting medical issues to the registrar. We are also making several updates that will help make it easier to navigate the legislation and our programs. Mr. Speaker, for one example, under the current Act, administrators of driving exams need to be appointed. Written exams are now standardized, so this extra layer of administration is no longer required and will be removed through this bill. We are also broadening the criteria around reporting collisions data in a way that will allow municipalities and researchers to access information while maintaining the privacy of individuals. Mr. Speaker, the bill will also identify and specify that the registrar had the authority to cancel certificates, permits, or licenses when someone provides false information to the Registry of Motor Vehicles. This was the intent of the Act, and these amendments will clarify the role of the registrar in these instances. Mr. Speaker, there are additional amendments in the bill, and while all of the amendments are necessary and important in their own way, several of them are simply updating the legislation. They correct issues that have been identified by staff or stakeholders through the administration of the Act over a period of time. Overall, they will help staff better deliver Registry of Motor Vehicle programs. Mr. Speaker, there is also a significant change to the graduated driver's license program here in Nova Scotia. A key feature of this program is the role of the supervising driver. This individual is required by the program to help provide a safe environment for a new driver to gain valuable experience behind the wheel. Mr. Speaker, part of this role is the ability to take control of the vehicle at any time. Simply put, you can't do this while impaired. Thank you. With that in mind, the Act will now require those supervising a driver in the learner and newly licensed phases of the graduated driver's license program to maintain a blood alcohol content below 0.05. Police will have the authority to administer a breathalyzer, and if a supervising driver is found to have a BAC at or higher than 0.05, they will immediately lose their license for at least 7 days and be required to pay a reinstatement fee. Repeat offences carry longer suspensions, Mr. Speaker. Impaired driving, sadly, remains one of the leading causes of collisions and fatalities on Nova Scotia's roadways. We need to instill a culture of safety in our new drivers with a simple message: drinking and driving never mix. This change, Mr. Speaker, will help reinforce the message right from the beginning while new drivers are still in their learning phase. Mr. Speaker, the final amendment I would like to highlight is a change to the fines related to pedestrian and vehicle collisions. This includes making all offences involving failing to yield to a pedestrian failing to yield to a vehicle or obey a signal, and failing to obey a crossing guard the same category as fines as other pedestrian-related offences. All of these fines, Mr. Speaker, will now carry a cost of at least $697.50. Making these fines consistent with others help reinforce that road safety is a shared responsibility here in this province. This includes being mindful of your own actions, both as a driver and as a pedestrian. We must all do our part to keep each other safe, Mr. Speaker. And with that, I thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to the comments from my honourable colleagues. Thank you.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the Minister for bringing this bill forward. There's two specific amendments, of course, in here that I'm most interested in. One of them, of course, revolves around the graduated licensing program, especially as a parent of a 17-year-old who just went through the program and understanding the intricacies of it, and the importance of making sure that our young folks. I have a 17-year-old kid. Yeah, I know. I'm really old. Okay, rabbit tracks. Rabbit tracks. I'm going down the hole there. But understanding the importance of the graduated licensing program to make sure that our youth understand the rules of the road, what they need to do, and get the true practice that they need to drive. I mean, you can know everything you want until you truly practice how to drive on the road. That's when you really get it. Now, I just want to sort of say this is, especially when it comes to that particular amendment, this is going back and fixing a piece of legislation that we brought forward, or that the government brought forward last October and November, because if we all remember, we debated Bill number 51, which was brought forward by the minister, but of course under a lot of work from the member for East Hants, and of course we thank them for bringing that forward. But if you remember at the time, Mr. Speaker, that bill contained important measures to strengthen that program, and our caucus at that time supported it wholeheartedly. The change that required drivers to maintain a 0 blood alcohol content for 2 years after they completed the learner, beginner, and the newly licensed phases of the program. We agreed with the changes that required supervisory drivers to be fully licensed for at least 2 years as well, making sure that the person that is the supervisory driver should be just that. It should be a person armed with experience and knowledge and the ability to supervise a new driver, to keep the new driver and all motorists safe, so that they can actually take control of that car in case something goes wrong. Not just, in some cases, a sober driver, if you'll permit me, Mr. Speaker. It's for that reason that we, as an opposition, spoke out against provision that did not put any limits on blood alcohol level to the supervisory driver at that time. The minister said requiring the supervisory driver to be awake and sober presented legal problems at the time. So I'm glad that 6 months later that we're able to, a year later, we're able to find what those problems are, to identify them, and making sure that they're in this piece of legislation to strengthen the Motor Vehicle Act. And we said that not requiring a supervisory driver to be awake and sober presented some common sense problems. Having supervisory drivers whose judgment and reaction times are impaired presents a safety problem. Like I said, they not only should be able to instruct the learner driver, but they should be able to take it over in case of a problem. At that time, if you remember, Mr. Speaker, we tried to amend Bill 51. That was kicked out. We tried to recommit Bill 51. That was kicked out. At every turn, the government used their majority to defeat common sense at the time. This was the amendment that we actually wanted. That's the amendment we wanted, and here we are a year later, it shows up. So here we are today, Mr. Speaker, doing the very thing that could have been done and that should have been done a year ago. So I can say this, better late than never. Thank you for bringing it forward. Just wish, maybe a year ago we could have saved each other a whole bunch of problems if we would just listen to each other. Just listen to each other sometimes. There's good, I know it's hard to believe that, but there's good ideas over here too. As far as the pedestrian issue, I have to agree with the minister. There are far too many car-pedestrian accidents happening. We seem to hear of it here in, of course, Metro Halifax and in Dartmouth and the metropolitan area of Nova Scotia. We do hear of car-pedestrian accidents, and that shouldn't be happening, but it should be treated in its respect. I mean, there is an education program that needs to happen or continually happen when it comes to this. The drivers of those cars need to be aware of the crosswalks, but the people crossing the road need to be aware of the cars as well. And just because you see the car doesn't mean the car sees you, and vice versa. We need to make sure that all can be done to make sure that this doesn't happen. And we've had a number of deaths about this as well, and I'm hoping that anything the department can do to make this better is a good one. So we look forward to hearing from Nova Scotians who come to present at law amendments, and hopefully if there's some amendments maybe or some good ideas that come from law amendments, and I hope the minister is ready to maybe accept them and add them in. Finally is simply this: there is nothing more honorable in our jobs when it comes to making sure the safety of our communities and our families are maintained by good common sense legislation like this one is here today. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I listened intently to my colleague from Barrington Argyll, and in particular the Minister of TIR. Actually, I agree with him about road safety and the importance of all these issues that to be addressed here today. But I want to suggest, Mr. Speaker, before I get into my notes, that the minister, and I've said this before, may be suffering from political amnesia or selective memory, because I want to just jog his memory here, because if you review Hansard 2014, and the member from Barrington Argyll suggested that our party, the NDP, wanted the government to ensure that supervisory drivers were not under the influence of alcohol. This was pointed out, and this is what I really enjoy about this House, is the opportunity to reflect and have the debates, and there is good points that come forward, and the member from Barrington Argyll suggested that, and I'm suggesting it there was a good idea to improve and make these amendments a year ago, and the minister and that party, Mr. Speaker, failed. They failed Nova Scotians. These amendments could have been made a year ago. Now, let's point out, there was a good discussion here last year, and I want to point out the scenario. Now, all of a sudden, it has to come from the Liberal side, and this is what's wrong with the politics, Mr. Speaker, and what I want to point out. Clearly, there was debate a year ago talking about these same amendments. And having the supervisor driver under the influence was painted as a scenario as when you have a youthful driver driving, and then a split-second decision where that could be corrected and save the individual from a devastating traffic situation. That was painted here, and it was presented in a very informal debate, and it was also pointed out in law amendments. That was an opportunity missed, and I suggest to you that that is selective memory, because I took perfect notes here, and when the minister had an opportunity to address it, he failed. There is good ideas that comes from this opposition. This is the prime example of it. I look forward to going to law amendments and hearing from the public. This is a part of the process, Mr. Speaker. There's good ideas that comes through our parliamentary process, and we cannot use a majority just to show that we have a majority and we don't listen to Nova Scotians or the oppositions. Thank you for the time, and I look forward to hearing from the public and this bill going to law amendments. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise for second reading of Bill number 133. I don't get to speak often in this House, but when it comes to road safety, that's my pet project, so I want to make sure that I could be here to speak to that. As members opposite noted, there was an amendment some of these amendments were issues that were raised in the last sitting of the House when Bill 51 was passed. I think what the opposition members fail to remember is that most of these measures were also in Bill 168. That was passed in 2007 by the then Conservative government. It was never enacted. It went through 4 years of NDP government and sat on their table, and then last year, excuse me.
Denise, set him straight.
Order, please. The honourable member for Hantseast has the floor.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I didn't want to incite riot, but thank you so much. I just wanted to point that out. Anyway, our government last year looked at all the measures in this bill and saw that there were measures that could be enforced right away, and they were. They were passed last year. This one amendment with the supervisory drivers and the low BAC was something that we weren't quite sure of exactly if there would be any challenges to that. So we wanted to make sure we got it right. So we made sure that it was taken to the department and fully researched and brought back this year to make sure it could be done when it could. And Mr. Speaker, I am so pleased that the minister has returned with this updated legislation that now addresses so many concerns in various areas of the Motor Vehicle Act. So kudos to him and his hardworking department. I've met with many of them. They're so hardworking. Because of their efforts to keep our roads safe, keeping our roads safe remains the department's top priority. Mr. Speaker, as the minister said, this bill includes 14 amendments. Our government has made further changes to the graduated licensing system that plugs that loophole that allows supervisory drivers to be legally impaired. Previously, there was no BAC condition for supervisory drivers at all in Nova Scotia. Although this isn't something that often happens, occasionally parents would use children who were in the learner and newly licensed phases of the graduating licensing program as designated drivers. As I said, this doesn't happen often, but the feeling is that when an adult is supervising a new driver, they must be prepared to take the wheel at any time. If they are seen to be impaired, law enforcement will now have the ability to ask for a breath sample. That was the problem last year. If the supervisory driver is over 0.05, then they will be treated as if they are driving. They will immediately lose their license for 7 days and be required to pay a reinstatement fee. It would be the same as if they were behind the wheel themselves. Also, Mr. Speaker, repeat offenses carry longer suspensions. People need to learn. Impaired driving sadly remains one of the leading criminal causes of death and collisions and fatalities on the road. Young drivers are overrepresented in all categories of road crashes, including those involving impaired driving. And I mean impaired by drugs or alcohol. Motor vehicle crashes are the #1 cause of death of young people between 16 and 25, and alcohol or drugs is a factor in 55% of these deaths. 16 to 25-year-olds constitute 13.6% of our population in 2010, but made up almost 33.4% of the alcohol-related traffic deaths. Studies conclude that young drivers are overrepresented in road crashes for primarily 2 reasons: inexperience and immaturity. They are more likely to speed, follow too closely, allow less time to merge with traffic, cross traffic lanes, pass other vehicles, overestimate their driving skills, and take even more risks. They also have high rates of driving after drinking and drug use, and of being a passenger of a driver who has been drinking or taking drugs. And how many times have we heard it said that people will say, you know, a child will say, I wasn't drinking and driving, but they don't think about getting in the vehicle with one, and they take that chance. You know, they're just playing Russian roulette with their lives. Young and novice drivers usually lack both driving and drinking experience. They tend to be risk takers and are less cautious than their older counterparts. So even in the absence of alcohol, young drivers are at a greater relative risk of crash than older, more experienced drivers. When you add alcohol to the equation, the risks become even higher. So, Mr. Speaker, you can appreciate that having a supervisory driver with alcohol in his or her system sets a very bad standard for that learning driver and a hazard to all other drivers on the road. We need to instill a culture of safety in our new drivers and keep reminding them that either alcohol or drugs and driving is a recipe for death and injury. There are many administrative sections to this legislation, including is the very definition of a novice driver and the clarification that novice drivers are to maintain a 0 blood alcohol content for 2 full years following their new license phase. One sector in this legislation also allows nurse practitioners, optometrists, occupational therapists can now join physicians in referring drivers to the registrar because of health concerns. Mr. Speaker, this is important, and I'm sure that all of us in the House have seen drivers on the road who should not be there because of their declining health. I remember when my father was diagnosed with cancer about 10 years ago, and even though he was having periods that he would black out, he wouldn't remember where he was or where he had driven, he didn't want to give up the independence of his license. I thought I was being clever when I called his doctor one day just before his appointment and asked the doctor to revoke his license, but my dad clued in really quick, and I'm not sure that he ever forgave me for that. But one of the things that is that he didn't drive anymore, but he refused to turn in his driver's license, and it might have been his only case of civil disobedience in his life. Mr. Speaker, the last thing I want to mention is a growing issue in this province, crosswalk safety. I don't know what's happened to people since when a pedestrian stopped the wait, look, and listen before crossing the street. So many times, Mr. Speaker, we have seen people simply walk across the road in a crosswalk with heads bowed to their phones or just assuming that the driver is paying more attention than they are. In any battle with a car and a pedestrian, the vehicle wins. Doesn't matter who's in the right or wrong. It's small consolation to families who buried loved ones that their family member was in the right of the situation. This is a shared concern and responsibility. Pedestrians need to be more careful, and drivers need to be more vigilant. I'm very hopeful that streamlining these penalties to a higher end will make positive change. All offenses involving failing to yield to a pedestrian, pedestrians failing to yield to a vehicle or obey a signal, and failing to obey a crossing guard, the same category of fines as other pedestrian-related offenses. And they all carry a whopping fine now of $697.50. Mr. Speaker, with these few words on these important changes to the Motor Vehicle Act, I will ask my colleagues once again to pass this bill and all these measures with the full support of the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to say a few words about this legislation, and certainly we're not going to be tinkering with this, but I want to compliment the minister with this is good legislation, and it may be a year later than we want it, but it's here and it's a good thing. We're living in an era of distractions, Mr. Speaker. I mean, there's you watch every day in your communities with people using cell phones, even iPads, texting, etc., Mr. Speaker, when they're in charge of a car. So young drivers are in a position where they are experiencing things for the first time. And although they may feel they are competent drivers, they certainly lack the experience of many things that can happen on our roads today. Mr. Speaker, for example, black ice, for example. A lot of new drivers haven't had the opportunity to experience black ice and what they should do when they run into that type of road. Accumulation of snow. My colleague mentioned about the intersections, Mr. Speaker. The intersections. From my 12 years of teaching driver ed with thousands of hours on the roads, intersections were the area that caused most difficulty for reactions and wanting to know what they should do prior to. And again, I found with young drivers, they didn't have the capacity in those early years to understand, to look ahead and anticipate what someone might do. Even if someone was standing along the sidewalk on the curb, not even at a sidewalk, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't mean they're going to stay there. So young drivers, again, they don't have that experience of anticipating that that person, although they may see you coming, they may also step out in front of that car. So you have to be ready for that. So there's so many areas of intersections, heavy traffic, that everything is new to these drivers, so to have a supervisory driver beside them that is in charge and willing to take over in case of an emergency, I guess, Mr. Speaker, you can't make legislation safe enough for young drivers. So I'm very pleased to see this legislation come forth and certainly support it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
If I'm to recognize the Honourable Minister of Transportation, it will be to close second reading on Bill number 133, the Motor Vehicle Act. The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my honourable colleagues for their comments today. In particular, the member from Hants East. I know that she's been a tremendous driving force. Losing her son, Bruce, to an impaired driver, Mr. Speaker, obviously was a devastating thing for her and her family. So every time there's a conversation about road safety and how we make things safer and make families safer and things better overall so that other Nova Scotia families don't have to relive what the MLA and her family went through is a pretty significant thing. So again, she puts her heart into this every day, not just with this legislation, but as an MLA. So we're certainly all fortunate to have her here, and we appreciate it. And in that vein, Mr. Speaker, I'll try to contain myself here with respect to the opposition's comments on some of the pieces. First of all, I want to explain when this issue came up last year with the supervisory driver, I think it's reasonable to say that no one disagreed with the points that were being made, whether it be through law amendments on the floor of the House. It wasn't about us not agreeing with that, but what it was about was a pending court case in BC. So we weren't sure if it was enforceable by law, so we wanted to make sure we got this right. If we push something through too quickly and it wasn't something that would be acceptable by way of the justice system, then we would have another issue and we'd be taking criticism on that, Mr. Speaker. So what we did, and again, what we suggested at that time was that we would allow the Department of Justice in coordination with the Department of Transportation and of course, Service Nova Scotia, to look at some of the ways we can get around and possibly, get away from that ruling that would make this unenforceable. So what we did was put an amendment in that would essentially say that the supervisory driver would have to have the ability to take over the vehicle in any circumstance. So that was the amendment, that was the piece. Mr. Speaker, I'm not a lawyer. I know there's many in here, but I'm not one. And as the minister, I've got to rely on the people who think that we sit down, we look at these things rationally, we make good decisions. This is an amendment that the staff came up with that would address this very issue. So that's the reason why we couldn't just put it in there when the session was happening the last time, and that's why the amendment comes today, Mr. Speaker. No one had ever suggested that it wasn't a good idea. And secondly, to that end, if you recall back to that time, Mr. Speaker, in that particular bill, one of the hot issues and contentious issues was that of the faint hope clause. So when we were talking about some of the details and how we would address some of the concerns from the member from Sackville-Cobequid, Argyle-Barrington, Queen-Shelburne, we had said at that point, we're going to solve these things and settle these things through regulation. So we will invite both opposition parties to participate in those conversations, Mr. Speaker. And we did that, Mr. Speaker. We did that, and the members didn't participate. Then check with your caucus. On multiple occasions. Well, okay, so we'll check with whoever the transportation critic is. We can check with him, but there's been multiple invites. I'm not here to lay the blame, Mr. Speaker, and make this all about the opposition. If they had confidence in our system and in our staff, then that's great. That's a good thing. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to. This is good. This is good legislation for the people of Nova Scotia, but I'm not going to take I'm not going to take. I'm not going to take criticism and lessons from the opposite side on how we do this properly, Mr. Speaker. This is a good bill. This is good information. I'm happy that the opposition would suggest that this was their idea and it could have been done a year ago, but there is prudence and rationale, Mr. Speaker. So with respect to political amnesia, they both had opportunities to push this legislation forward, their own legislation. They didn't do this, Mr. Speaker. The point is, we don't make these things and we don't have these conversations. It's not about the camera. It's not about the floor of the legislature. We go away from here and put the diligence in and the hard work, Mr. Speaker, and we do good things for the people of Nova Scotia. We put our time in, and that's what results here today. And with those comments, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to close the debate on Bill 133. Thank you.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 133, the Motor Vehicle Act. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye? Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 133, an act to amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, please call Bill number 134, the Liquor Control Act.
Now call Bill number 134, the Liquor Control Act. The Honourable Minister of Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that Bill number 134, an act to amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act, be read for a second time. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to rise in the House today to speak to these amendments. The amendments proposed today do not create any change on their own. Rather, they create the authority to make changes to the liquor licensing regulations. The aim is to cut red tape for the Nova Scotia liquor manufacturing industry. In the coming months, we will look at the regulations to identify areas where we can reduce red tape for Nova Scotia's liquor manufacturing industry. Ongoing consultation with the industry and stakeholders will be part of this process. Mr. Speaker, our government is working to make Nova Scotia the most competitive and business-friendly environment in Canada. We're getting out of the way of business, and we're creating the right conditions for the private sector to be successful. Government's role includes doing what we can to cut red tape, modernize legislation, and create regulatory excellence. We want to make interactions between business and government faster and less frequent so that our various industries can focus on what they need to do to make themselves more successful and grow our economy. Government's job is to clear the way for the private sector to pursue growth and to maintain a policy and regulatory environment that supports and attracts business. It's also our job to remove obstacles, Mr. Speaker, not create unnecessary red tape and disincentives that deter new entrepreneurs. By doing so, Mr. Speaker, we will create the right conditions so the private sector can be successful. We believe that clearing the way for business is the best way forward for all Nova Scotians. Business is what drives our economy forward. This is what will create jobs and a more prosperous future. Mr. Speaker, our Nova Scotia liquor manufacturers, such as our wineries, breweries, and distilleries, are developing unique and exceptional products. For example, Nova Scotia's first and only signature wine, Tidal Bay, continues to grow in popularity with 12 wineries now producing this product. Created to reflect our unique geography and coastal breezes, Tidal Bay provides local vintners with a signature wine designation like those found in other wine regions such as Chianti, Bordeaux, and Burgundy. Chianti. We also have a vibrant and growing craft beer industry and several distilleries which are producing award-winning products. This industry, Mr. Speaker, in addition to responding to a demand from Nova Scotians, also plays a key role in the tourism industry. Visitors to our province want to experience uniquely Nova Scotian products, whether that's our seafood, our wines, our craft beers, our spirits, or the many other experiences that are exclusive to Nova Scotia. We have been consulting extensively with Nova Scotia liquor manufacturers on changes we can make to the Liquor Control Act and its regulations, which will reduce red tape and modernize legislation in order that they can increase their competitiveness. We want to continue to hear from them to further explore all opportunities which will help them succeed. We also know, Mr. Speaker, that Nova Scotians want the sale and consumption of alcohol to be undertaken in a responsible way that ensures public safety. So as we look at ways to modernize the Liquor Control Act, we will consult with all stakeholders and aim to strike a balance between reducing red tape, which our industry stakeholders across government are asking us to do, while ensuring that appropriate and reasonable legislation and regulations are in place to control the sale and consumption of alcoholic products. Mr. Speaker, we understand that business owners and citizens want their dealings with government to be as quick and efficient as possible. My priority is to ensure we exceed the expectations of Nova Scotians in creating efficiencies for business, excellence in service for citizens, reducing red tape, and pursuing regulatory excellence. The amendments announced today are a step forward in this direction. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'll conclude my remarks and look forward to hearing from my colleagues.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is my pleasure to rise to speak to these amendments to the Liquor Control Act, Bill 134. I am encouraged by the intention of this bill, which is to enable regulations to be changed to make it easier for manufacturers such as breweries, wineries, and distilleries that have licenses for consumption in venues like restaurants. Our beer, wine, and spirits industry in Nova Scotia has been driven by the hard work and passion of entrepreneurs. We could use more of this ambitious entrepreneurship in our province. The hard work and superior products produced by the industry in Nova Scotia has been recognized around the globe with numerous international awards. Changing these regulations would make it easier and reduce red tape for these businesses, and would also allow manufacturers to be able to sell some of their product in an establishment with a consumption license, rather than having to always sell the product in a separate retail space that we often see now. While this legislation is merely enabling, I do hope that the new regulations that are being developed will do much more to help reduce red tape for existing and emerging small businesses in the wine, craft beer, and spirits industry in Nova Scotia. I know that the need for this change likely would not have even been foreseen even 20 years ago, and at that time it was rare for a manufacturer of wine, beer, or spirits to also have a license for consumption in an establishment like a restaurant on site. With the development of the local industry in this area, it has become popular to have a restaurant on site which serves the manufacturer's product in addition to food. I hope that once these regulations are brought forward, it might encourage other small players in the industry to develop ventures like restaurants on site, which can provide great experiences to visitors to Nova Scotia as well as provide employment. It has been encouraging to see how craft breweries, wineries, and distilleries have proliferated in many areas, including rural areas from Shelburne right to Cape Breton. One concern I do have, and that the minister may be able to follow up in his closing remarks, is I know that my concern does go around the unintended consequences of this bill. And I'll give you an example. I know that right now there's a lot of consulting taking place. In Pictou County, we've had our 6 municipalities come together collectively to discuss that there's potentially the option of having established restaurants allow you to come in and have 2 drinks without having to order food. And this is something that I am concerned about, because we as a county we don't support this. And I have letters to show that we would like to keep our family restaurants. And so I worry about if this bill will enable changes like that to happen outside the legislature, which I feel would be unfair. I think anything surrounding alcohol definitely should be discussed and debated in the House. So perhaps the minister will be able to answer that question for me. I do know that I look forward to any presenters that may come to discuss this bill at Law and Amendments, and certainly will await the release of the new regulations that will actually implement the changes that have been spoken about today. And I thank you very much.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And at the outset, I'm pleased to stand in my place and make a few comments on this particular bill. I'm not sure what the number of the bill is, but 134. Thank you. I'm disappointed that the minister hasn't provided perhaps some samples to help this debate establish why it's so important to eliminate red tape and move forward with a piece of legislation like this. I think it might have allowed us to move this a little more quickly. But at any rate, Mr. Speaker, I think we all would agree that we are experiencing in our province a kind of, I don't know if renaissance is the right word, but certainly we're seeing the emergence of an industry in our wines, in our craft beer, in our distilleries that we all feel very proud of. I certainly do. It's fabulous, you know, when you have people who visit from other provinces and you're able to have dinner in your own home and serve local wine, or go out and experience some of the many, many excellent craft beers. And I know that our distilleries and some of the fine scotch that is coming out of our distilleries, as well as other liqueurs, really allows Nova Scotia to showcase the province that we are and the uniqueness and the flavors of the food that is developed here, and particularly, I would say, in our wineries. You know, the minister made reference to the Tidal Bay wines and how popular they are and how well they're doing, not only at the farm gate and at the various wineries, but certainly in the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation. And I know that wine has overtaken the sale of beer in the Liquor Corporation. And I also know that the craft beers now are a growing part of the beer market. And we have so many fantastic craft beers in this province, and not to single individual craft beers out, but in my own constituency, we have the North Brewing Company, which, you know, are really quite remarkable. I wasn't able to participate last night in the Taste of Nova Scotia reception downstairs, but I would dare say that there probably were some local wines and perhaps some local craft beers available. I know not so long ago I was in the constituency of my colleague from Queen's Shelburne. They have a fine craft beer, the Hell's Bay label out of Liverpool, and they have also a fantastic craft beer from Shelburne. Boston, yes, that's right. So it's, you know, we can go all across the province. I recently tried a blueberry flavored infused beer out of Cape Breton, which is pretty amazing. So we all are very proud of the local productions, and I'm sure we would like to see these, this industry grow, expand, prosper, and continue to provide employment and opportunities for people all across our province. Now, this legislation is, as the minister says, an attempt to reduce the red tape in terms of being able to promote local products and having them available. And the one example I've heard from the government is that, you know, you could go to a restaurant at one of these wineries, for example, and have wine with your meal, but you couldn't buy a bottle there to go home. You'd have to go down the road or go to the farm gate, where they have a different license, I think, to sell. And so this would give the government some capacity to allow the sale on the premises. And that certainly, if that was how this legislation were to be used, would make a great deal of sense. However, as the previous speaker indicated, this legislation is so broad in the way it's presented, it essentially could allow for changes to the Liquor Control Act family restaurants, for example, without ever coming back here to this legislature for any debate or any discussion or any presentations at the Law Amendments Committee. And that certainly is of concern to us. We in the NDP caucus are very supportive of the idea and the need to lessen red tape for this growing and burgeoning industry across our province. And we think we need to do whatever steps we need in legislation and in policy to enhance the growth of that industry and the promotion of that industry. But we also want to ensure that that is how this legislation is actually used, and that it doesn't go beyond those boundaries without at least a debate and a discussion here in the legislature, because that's what we're here for. So with those few remarks, and without the opportunity to sample any of the wares that are associated with this bill, Madam Speaker, I take my seat.
The honourable member for Clare Digby.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It takes great privilege to rise today and speak on Bill 134. To begin, I'd like to certainly thank the Minister for all the work that he's done in his department. I know that there has been extensive consultation with the industry. He certainly has, I think, brought forward what in simply a couple of lines changes the path that we have in this province and opens up the doors to economic opportunities. I'm encouraged to hear the remarks from across the floor. I think it's very valid to point out some of the around Renaissance. Certainly, there is a change in the atmosphere in Nova Scotia. We heard just previously a couple of bills that were marked on, Bill 51 and Bill 133 that just came through the House. And I think the province of Nova Scotia and actually probably all of Canada, there's been quite a significant cultural change in alcohol consumption, in the respect for alcohol with our youth, with our culture. And I have to also commend our member from our side that has been very active in working on that. It opens the door for the ability to move forward, I think, and that's what this bill does, is it allows us to expand on the opportunities. We have some antiquated legislation sometimes that it's important to readdress it and expand the opportunities to be innovative and move the province forward. The talk of the craft beer, the spirit industry, and the winemaking is certainly something that I also like to mention that our Minister of Agriculture has been very, very engaged with that sector. I'm very proud of a lot of the work that he's doing, especially with the wine industry, but I also know for a fact that he's had a lot of conversations with the craft beer industry, with the hop growers in Nova Scotia, and we have some exciting opportunities. It's one fact that's little known here that I'd like to bring to the floor, that Nova Scotia in the world is the premier location in the world to grow sparkling wines. Now, that's a little known fact. It's something that we're beginning to realize through the good work that a lot of our winemakers are showing the fruits of, I guess to pun a phrase. But tourism is the other side. We've heard constantly that we want to double our numbers in the next 10 years, and certainly convenience is something that tourists look for. You hear it over and over. They come from regions of Ontario and New England states where sometimes the regulatory world is a little bit different than it is here, and their opportunities to I shouldn't say be pampered, but certainly have the convenience of experiencing everything that this province has to offer. Sometimes we stymie a little bit. So I think this piece of legislation is going to allow us to explore more opportunities in that area. I'd also just like to quickly touch on, I know there were some remarks from our member from Pictou West around restaurants and opening up the opportunities there. There's certainly other areas too that we have around I would also say there are antiquated pieces of legislation around plebiscites for wet and dry areas that go back to Prohibition days. Certainly there are some municipalities and some communities that would like to see a little bit of movement there, but to the contrary, I've heard people in the restaurant area that feel that they are encumbered a little bit just with the simple ability to have a business meeting and sit there and just easily have a beer. I don't think anybody's suggesting that we move into the world of turning family restaurants into pubs, into liquor establishments and nightclubs. But I think the discussion is important, and I again thank the minister for what I know and I feel very comfortable is his engagement with that industry. I am very proud also, just to remark finally, keep my comments short, that in 2 or 3 short lines within a piece of legislation, we can open up the doors of opportunity for our wine, our craft beer, and our spirit industry in this province and moving us forward. And I commend the outside-of-the-box thinking and hopefully see good fruits that come forward of this. Thank you.
The honourable member for Halifax-Chebucto.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Speaker. I just quickly want to kind of follow up on this discussion of this bill. To me, what this bill states is that Nova Scotia is finally going down the road of allowing businesses to succeed and building a foundation for business to succeed in Nova Scotia, and that's what government's role is to do. And getting rid of this red tape on this is one great step for small businesses in Nova Scotia, with many more to happen. You know, and I guess that's where one of my first things that when I got elected, I met with the member from Clayton Park West, who was the finance minister, and I got all the players in the restaurant, wine and beer and liquor, all around the table to have a discussion. Let's look at our antiquated liquor laws in Nova Scotia, and how can we create a foundation where these liquor laws can be looked at, can be shared and changed to ensure that businesses succeed. And that's the start. That was the start of the process of changing this one law, but changing other laws, from the growler change, where now bars can sell growler, or breweries can sell growlers. I mean, these are good things for Nova Scotia. We got a long way to go. And the new minister is doing these things very well. And I guess, you know, looking at, like last night when we had Taste of Nova Scotia here, and we had Ironworks, you know, and I walked up to her and go, "How are things doing?" She said, "We had the best season ever. The rules that changed helped us succeed, helped us grow our business. We were able to hire 2 staff because of these changes. These are good stories because of the red tape reduction, and we're willing to look at that." But we have a way to go. There's still some crazy rules out there, for sure. You know, if you go to Toronto, and I do recommend going to this one bar. It's a Russian vodka bar, and you can go and you can taste all different vodkas from around the world. But the thing is, when you order your bottle of vodka, it sits in a block of ice. In Nova Scotia, we can't do that. It sits in a locked cage on your table, and you're not able to sample it. You have to call the waiter over and get them to unlock the cage and pour yourself a drink, and that doesn't work. You know, that's not about increasing business. That's not creating an experience. It's about, those are the things that this is the start of things to look at. This is the start of changing regulations. This is the start to make business successful. And this is a big reason why I ran, was to get rid of this red tape reduction, because the past government wouldn't have a conversation about small businesses and the regulations, and that's what was frustrating. And so I am so proud to sit here on this side of the floor to represent this government, to get rid of red tape, to move this province forward. So thank you very much, Minister.
If I am to recognize the Honourable Minister of Business, it will be to close debate on Bill number 134, the Liquor Control Act.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleagues for their constructive comments on both sides of the House. I think we all realize the opportunities that exist. Small business growth is going to be important to rural Nova Scotia, and I know there are components within our urban communities that have equal opportunities for growth. I do recognize the concerns of my colleague from Pictou West. What I do want to share is that we have done extensive consultation, and we are hearing circumstances on both sides of the discussion that certainly we have to listen to. But I want to commit to my colleague that that feedback is valuable. We appreciate that, and we'll continue to seek the input of those both in industry and communities who could be impacted. And I also want to commit to my colleague that the concerns around both my colleague from Pictou West and my colleague from Halifax Needham, the concerns around advancing change without dialogue is not a practice that I would support, and commit to both of my colleagues that we will continue that discussion both within this environment and within their communities and between ourselves. I will say, Madam Speaker, that if I thought for a minute that the Speaker himself or yourself would have permitted me to provide some samplers, I certainly would have taken that opportunity, because there are many, as we saw last evening, and as we see on a regular basis, to my colleague's comments, that there is an emergence of an industry that we are all proud of. And it is critically important that, that we advance the opportunities and open doors, as each of my colleagues on the government side of the House have expressed. This really is an opportunity for us to grow the industry. But I will say this, Madam Speaker, given all of the comments, that I believe the dialogue that we have undertaken and the objectives that we are pursuing will balance both public access and public responsibility with public safety. And that is an important piece of this discussion. It's not lost on me. My background has been in policing, and I certainly appreciate and recognize the other argument. And that's not lost, Madam Speaker. So I will commit to all of my colleagues in the House that we will continue the dialogue in a very constructive way with the single objective of growing small business, expanding opportunities, and putting a spark plug in the economy of Nova Scotia. Thank you, Madam Speaker. With that, I rise to close debate on Bill number 134, an Act to amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act.
The motion is for second reading of Bill number 134, the Liquor Control Act. With all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 134, an act to amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Madam Chair, I move that you do now leave the chair and the House resolve itself into a committee of the whole on bills.
Carried. We will take a 2-minute recess and reconvene. Committee of the whole House on Bills will come to order. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, would you please call Bill number 122, the Interjurisdictional Support Orders Act?
Bill number 122, the Interjurisdictional Support Order Act. The Clerk.
Madam Chair, Bill number 122 was referred back from the Committee on Law Amendments without amendments and contains 3 clauses.
Shall Clause 1 carry? Shall remaining clauses carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? The bill is carried. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Madam Chair, would you please call Bill number 123, the Paramedics Act?
Bill number 123, the Paramedics Act. The Clerk.
Madam Chair, Bill number 123 contains 112 clauses and was referred back from the Committee of Law Amendments without amendments.
Shall Clause 1 carry? Shall remaining clauses carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? The bill is carried. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Madam Chair, would you please call Bill number 124, the Social Workers Act?
Bill number 124, the Social Workers Act. The Clerk.
Madam Chair, Bill number 124 contains 34 clauses and was referred from the Committee on Law Amendments without amendments.
Shall Clause 1 carry? Shall the remaining clauses carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? The bill is carried. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Madam Chair, would you please call Bill number 126, Pooled Registered Pension Plans Act?
Bill number 126, the Pooled Registered Pensions Act. The Clerk.
Madam Chair, Bill number 126 contains 4 clauses and was referred back from the Committee on Law Amendments without amendments.
Shall Clause 1 carry? Shall the remaining clauses carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? The bill is carried. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Madam Chair, would you please call private and local bills?
Nope. I have to go back up there. No,
No.
I have to do that from here? Okay. Private and local bills.
Can recognize me again.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Madam Chair, would you please call Bill number 120?
Bill number 120, the discontinuance of the Pictou County Farmers Mutual Fire Insurance Company Act. The Clerk.
Madam Chair, Bill 120 was referred from the Committee on Local and Private Bills back to the House without amendments and contains 3 clauses.
Shall Clause 1 carry? Shall the remaining clauses carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? The bill is carried.
Is that your first one? Put it up on the wall. We'll get Listen, Carla, we'd buy you a frame, but
The Honourable Government House Leader.
everyone will know. Madam Chair, I move that the committee do now rise and you report progress to the House.
The motion is carried. The committee will now rise and report its business to the House. The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on Bills reports
that the Committee of the Whole has met and considered the following bills: Bill number 120, Bill number 122, Bill number 123, Bill number 124, and Bill 126 without amendments, and the Chairwoman has been instructed to recommend these bills to the favorable consideration of the House.
Ordered that these bills be read for a third time on a future day. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That concludes the government's business for today. Prior to giving the business for tomorrow, just for those who have been watching and keeping track, I can advise that the Law Amendments Committee will be meeting on Monday, November 30th. We'll be able to give the exact hour tomorrow. But for those who wish to know what bills will be considered on that day, I will list off now all of the bills that will be considered on Monday. Bill number 112, Bill number 118, Bill number 127, number 128, number 129, number 130, number 131, 133, and 134. Again, we'll confirm based on how many presenters, what times law amendments will meet on Monday, but thought the House would want to know exactly what will be considered on that day. Madam Speaker, tomorrow the House will sit on Friday, November 27th from the hours of 9 a.m. until 1 p.m. Following the daily routine and question period, we will be going into second reading of Government Bills number 135, number 136, as well as private and local bills number 137. We will as well be doing third reading on bills number 122, 123, 124, 126, and 120, which are all the bills that we just dealt with at the Committee of the Whole. So, Madam Speaker, with that, I move the House do now rise to meet again tomorrow, Friday, November 27th, from the hours of 9 a.m. to 1 p.m.
The motion is the House rise to meet again on the 27th of November, tomorrow, from the hours of 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. With those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. We stand adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Thank you, everyone.